Funding for this program is provided by the Walton Family Foundation, dedicated to ensuring healthy rivers and oceans for people and nature. The foundation supports communities addressing climate impacts on their water resources, because protecting our waters is fundamental to a sustainable future. The Walton Family Foundation, where people and nature thrive together. Funding for this program is provided by
Cue.
Live from Grand Junction, Colorado, on the banks of the Colorado River, welcome to Tipping Point, a river reimagined. I'm Miles O'Brien with PBS News, and for the next 2 hours we're going to tackle one of the most complex and consequential challenges facing the American West. How do you share an essential river that is shrinking before our eyes? We're here at Camp Eddy, right along the river, and today the setting tells part of the story. It's about 99 degrees. The river is running low, and across the basin, reservoirs are depleted, and water managers are bracing for another difficult year. It's a fitting backdrop for the negotiations underway right now. A lot of heat, not a lot of water, and very little room left for disagreement. We've assembled a summit meeting of sorts. Some of the key players trying to negotiate the future of the Colorado River are here with us. For years, the 7 Colorado River Basin states have been at loggerheads, unable to agree on how to share a river that can no longer reliably deliver all the water promised from it. Now the federal government has stepped in, poised to impose rules for the next 2 years that call for significant reductions in water use. The immediate goal is to maintain functional levels in the 2 giant reservoirs at the heart of the system, Lake Powell and Lake Mead. But those cuts also leave farmers, cities, and tribes throughout the basin asking a much bigger question: what happens after that? Make no mistake, the Colorado River is in a full-blown crisis. And as they say in politics, you should never waste a good crisis. So, over the next 2 hours, we're going to dig into the disagreements, confront some uncomfortable realities, and we hope move the conversation toward solutions. And you are a part of this conversation. Send us your questions and comments on whatever platform you're watching us on now. They'll be funneled to me here, and I'll work as many of them into our discussion as I can. More on that in a moment. But first, before we start debating how to fix the Colorado River, let's spend a few minutes understanding how this remarkable river works and how we got to the point where we are asking it to deliver more water than nature can reliably provide. The Colorado River, almost 1,500 miles long, winds its way through 7 states and into Mexico. This river basin is filled with lush natural ecosystems. It transforms 6 million acres of barren desert into fertile farmland. 40 million people are sustained by this water. It's the most heavily utilized river in the U.S., and it starts here as a deep blanket of snow high in the Rocky Mountains of Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. In the spring, when the snowpack melts, water flows downhill, nourishing plant and animal life and filling the streams that feed the mighty Colorado River.
So most of the water in the Colorado River starts as snowpack. And one of the reasons is that mountains act as these big catchments of precipitation.
The snowpack is like a huge natural reservoir of water in a part of the country where there is very little of it. So how best to share it? In 1922, then Secretary of Commerce Herbert Hoover met with representatives of the river basin states. They signed the Colorado River Compact, which determines how the precious resource is allocated. Once each state's agreed on their fair shares, they each established a seniority system. First in time, first in right.
There's kind of a hierarchy of water rights. That means that people who gained access to the river first, they have what we would call a senior water right.
The signers of the pact factored in 18 years of flow data from the early 1900s. But it happened to be an extraordinarily wet period of time. The Colorado River Compact was overdrawn from the start. For years, they tried to make up the deficit by pouring concrete to retain and redirect the river in bold, ingenious ways. The Hoover Dam, which spans the river between Nevada and Arizona, created the largest reservoir in the country, Lake Mead. It is the most famous feature of an expansive network of dams, canals, pipes, and pumps.
Reservoirs that we've built, this whole system of water supply is truly amazing. And it's allowed our society to grow and to thrive in a way that just would not be possible whatsoever without the reservoirs.
But today, after more than 20 years of drought, 100 years of increasing global temperatures, and relentless demand on the river, the two largest reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell, are at all-time low levels. Water from the Colorado River no longer makes it to the Sea of Cortez. And the 7 states in the river basin are at odds as they try to find new ways to share this shrinking resource. There is little to suggest this trend will reverse anytime soon. For years, humans overspent the Colorado River and nature covered the overdrafts. But now the bill has come due. So the real question is, who is ready to pick up the check? Can and will the federal government provide the kind of money needed to compensate farmers for fallowing fields and using less water? And can that bring the river back into balance? Some of the many difficult questions confronting us as the Colorado River enters a new era, one in which there simply isn't enough water to satisfy all the promises made over the past century. Throughout today's live stream, we'll be joined by Shannon Mullane of the Colorado Sun, who is the Colorado River reporter there. She spent years reporting on this devilishly complex river and the people who depend on it. Shannon and our PBS News digital team will be watching your comments and questions. Shannon, good to have you with us. This is a precipitous moment for the Colorado River, to be sure. What are some of the trends and things you're looking at as you're doing your stories right now?
Yeah, thank you for having me.
120.
You know, I'm here in Colorado. I report on this every single day. And I think in a drought year like this one, it really drives home how hard and complicated it can be to share water. You know, we're seeing cities that launched water restrictions earlier than usual. We've got reservoirs that are low or completely empty. Farmers aren't able to finish the irrigation season. They don't have enough water, and fish are being stressed out by extraordinarily high water temperatures. And that's just in Colorado. That's not even considering the complexity of managing water across state lines with Mexico, with 30 tribal nations. So, you know, as these negotiations continue, the question that's really at hand, the fundamental question is, what's going to happen to the Colorado River in the future? And I'm really curious to see how the discussion goes today and what we find out about what that future could look like.
Shannon, it's such a hard story to cover. Give us an idea of the kind of challenges you face. I know you get to cover it all the time, which helps, but it's not easy to explain this to a broad audience, is it?
No, Miles, it really is not. We're often wading through a lot of jargon. There's 100 years of complicated legalese happening, and so we're spending a lot of time trying to explain what the experts say so that it is accessible to everybody else.
All right, thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. Our next guest can shed some light on what the federal government plans to do to close the growing gap between supply and demand. After years of negotiations, the 7 Colorado River states have been unable to agree on new rules for sharing the river when the current guidelines expire at the end of this year. So the Bureau of Reclamation recently released its long-awaited environmental impact statement, laying out options for managing Lake Powell and Lake Mead and setting the stage for the federal government to decide what comes next. Andrea Travnik is the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the U.S. Department of Interior. I spoke to her on Monday. Andrea, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. The 7 states of the Colorado River Basin can't seem to come up with their own plan for managing and sharing what is a shrinking river. Can you give us, just in plain English, what the federal government has done, what Department of Interior, Bureau of Reclamation has done to mandate some cutbacks that match the output of the river?
So actually, the federal government, the only thing that we have out on the street right now is the final environmental impact statement. So that lays out a preferred alternative that has a decision framework that lays out how Lake Powell coordinated operations would be with Lake Mead, what that shortage could possibly be if we get into that real hydrology situation. It also looks at how we potentially would operate the upper reservoirs above Lake Powell and Lake Mead in their record of decisions. So we are right now working on the 27-28 operating guidelines that will lay out what that shortage might look like. So right now it's looking like it'll have to be 1.5 million acre feet that's going to have to be shared with the 7 basins, the lower basin states at 1.25 million acre feet, and then of course with Mexico having that 250,000 acre feet shortage. So that's what we're looking at for 27-28.
Should we assume that the framework which came out in the environmental impact statement is pretty much what the federal government would prefer happens, assuming no agreement comes together between the states?
As you look at that environmental impact statement and you look at the preferred alternative, it's a decision framework. So it's still working to try to have flexibility for those 7 basin states to come together on consensus. So right now, that first one that's going to roll out is that 27-28 operating guidelines. So looking at what that real hydrology is that's coming into the system, right? We saw that this year we had the lowest snowpack on record that was coming in, about 3.5 million acre feet. So also making sure that we're able to adjust as needed. So I think you're going to see, too, in the operating guidelines that come out, really taking a close look every month of what is happening with the system, knowing that we are very close, right? Seeing the record low elevations on Lake Mead and Lake Powell. So it really is going to be working through that operations and at the same time coordinating with those 7 basin states.
This plan that the federal government has put out contemplates cuts in the lower basin without any mandatory cuts in the upper basin. The lower basin would prefer there be mandatory cuts up and down the system.
We know that what the Secretary's authorities are, right? In the lower basin, he's the water master, and that is where he has to decide if there's a surplus or a shortage. But we know you have to look at what that real hydrology is, continue to have the hard conversations around the table on how that shortage might be distributed, including working with the lower basin as well as the upper basin.
It is 2 very distinct rivers in that respect, lower and upper basin, and the federal government does have many more levers of power in the lower basin, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, there's a lot of different interpretations as it relates to the compact, as it relates to the various acts that, right, the law of the river that everybody talks about. There's different ways that folks are interpreting those, and the Secretary does, as far as the lower basin, as the water master, does have a little bit more authority there, but still operates those upper reservoirs and tries to coordinate that operation between Lake Powell and Lake Mead.
Agriculture is by far the biggest consumptive use along the river. I don't have to tell you that. I think about 75%. Clearly, that's where the water is. Is there some way to incentivize reducing the agricultural acreage in the Colorado River Basin?
So as far as the federal government's role, right, we know that we have seen those opportunities to partner with our 7 basin states and our water contractors. We've seen over the last several years that the lower basin, working together with those water contractors, has been able to raise Lake Mead 150 feet. So we do know that conservation is working. So continuing to be a partner at the table, the federal government working with those other stakeholders will be important.
Do we need to think about something more permanent as far as the amount of agriculture along this basin?
Well, I think we know, as many of other water managers know, right, you can't just have one tool in the toolbox. So conservation is going to be a piece of that, but we're also going to have to look for more opportunities, right? Is it desalination? Is it water reuse? Is it looking at exchanges? So having opportunities for water managers within the basin to have the opportunity to put different tools to use based on the situation.
Let's talk about those 2 big reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell. What are the red lines as far as you are concerned on those reservoirs, and at what point are there kind of tripwires that change the equation and the conversation?
Well, I think we all know that the goal, right, you would want to try to keep those elevations in an area where there is more certainty of what that water delivery is going to be coming down. But if you can keep those elevations higher, that's where you have more certainty of that water delivery.
Let's talk about the tribal nations for a moment. 30 tribal nations with water rights at some degree of development. How do you answer those needs from the tribal nations and still manage this river as it declines?
Those tribal nations are an important piece, of course, to the Colorado River Basin, right? So they've got some of the longest standing historic rights to the river. Some of those, as they have worked through their settlement opportunities, we have several tribal nations that are also looking at those Indian water rights settlements right now. So continuing to work with them, trying to work with, right, they first have to go through the state, they also have to go through Congress. So as they're going through those various steps, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Department of the Interior is at the table with them. Because, right, we would want to see those settled as well.
It seems like litigation is a distinct possibility. Would that be not a productive way to solve this?
I've been in water negotiations a long time. You'd rather be at the table having those hard conversations with the various water managers and the various folks that are impacted by it versus having a judge.
So, is there an agreement possible? It seems like this is, if you'll excuse the term, kind of insoluble problem at times.
I think an agreement is possible. I always have hope as it relates to negotiating on water. It's tough. It takes time. It takes effort. There's a lot of passion, and it impacts a lot of people. So definitely understanding where those frustrations might be, right? Each day might be a little bit different than the previous day. And then looking ahead to the future, trying to see what those tough decisions might lead to as people are making decisions. But I still have hope that we could get there.
Andrea Travnik, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
My next guest knows the Colorado River in just about every way you could know it. As a young man, Brad Udall cut his teeth as a river guide, running hundreds of trips down the Colorado River and gaining an intimate appreciation for its beauty, power, and wonder. Later, he turned to academia, studying the science behind the river and the forces that shape it. As it happens, he began his academic career at about the same time an epic drought began taking hold across the Southwest. More than 2 decades later, it's become one of the most severe dry periods the region has experienced in at least 1,000 years. Brad Udall, welcome. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
You know, when we first came here, I thought it'd be nice to get a raft out, but it's a little too shallow here, Brad, so I think we'll have to go a little further downriver, or maybe not this season. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know that you're going to float a boat in much of the Colorado River right now.
It could be the case. Well, let's talk about how this epic drought, and you have another fancier term for it called aridification, which implies something more long-lasting. Let's just talk about this long-lasting drought, what aridification means, and how that has affected the flow of the river over the last 2 decades.
So since 2000, the river's down 20%. Since 2020, it's down 35%. There's a whole bunch of scientific studies that suggest that this is very much human-caused. It's due to our greenhouse gas emissions and the warming of the earth right now. This March was terrible. It's the warmest March in U.S. history. It set records throughout the West. We had the earliest and lowest snowpack ever, and that's our future, unfortunately.
Well, give us a sense, that snowpack problem, it's kind of like the cherry on top of the sundae here, but as these dry years continue, every now and then you get a reprieve. For example, if next winter something happened, I know that El Nino is on its way, for example, and there was a lot more snowpack. Is that something that changes the equation appreciably?
No. We have multiple examples over the last 27 years of one good year being followed by multiple bad years. And what's happened in the case of Lake Mead and Lake Powell is this stair-stepping down to the point where we are now, with these reservoirs full in 2000 and 25% full now, just above minimum power pool. And in the case of Glen Canyon Dam, we're at dead pool light right now.
Well, that's a scary thought. Catherine Sorensen and her team, she's at ASU. There were some CU people, other people involved in a study recently where they talked about a system crash.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a scary thought. But what translated, that means what's called run of the river. And I'd like you to explain what that term is and how close you think the river might be to that point in time.
So reservoirs are designed to buffer inflows. In the case of Colorado, the flows will vary by a factor of 5. And what you want a reservoir to do is to give you an annual mean flow out of the river over the long-term average. So reservoirs are designed to go up and down. They're not designed to bottom out and to go down to dead pool or even, frankly, below minimum power pool. And what we've done now is drawn these reservoirs down to they're just barely above both of these cases, minimum power and dead pool. Dead pool is the point where you lose control of the reservoir. Mother Nature controls controls what happens, it controls what comes in, it controls what you send out the bottom. And so man is no longer in control, and all of a sudden we're subject to the whims of Mother Nature.
So all that concrete poured in those two dams to create those two giant reservoirs would be for naught in a case like that, essentially?
Absolutely. I mean, all they turn into is big basins that evaporate water that we have no control over.
It's kind of hard to overstate the consequences of losing those water bank accounts for the states that rely on it in the lower basin. We're talking about Arizona, California, and Nevada.
40 million people in the basin, most of those in the lower basin, and yes, people are heavily dependent on this water. You know, it's 40% of Phoenix, it's 80% of Tucson, a quarter of the water in Los Angeles. Dead pool is a bad thing for everybody involved, including the farmers in the lower basin too.
Well, it's hard, I know, because it's such a dynamic system and a big system. And it's very difficult to measure these kinds of things. But what can we say, what is the real deficit right now? The amount of flow versus the amount of usage. Can we come up with numbers like that?
Absolutely. So over the last 27 years, these reservoirs on average have lost about 1.5 million acre-feet per year. And that's with 12 million acre-foot flow. With 10 million acre-foot, you get to add 2 million into that. So the last 7 years, if we're running a deficit of more than 3 million acre-feet a year potentially out of these reservoirs.
Okay, when you start talking about 3 million acre-feet a year, and just to explain that term, that is the amount of water at 1 foot depth covering 1 acre. That's an acre-foot. I forget how many millions of gallons that is.
325,000 gallons, if you must know.
300, yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Math in public, Brad Udall can do it. Congratulations, it's good. So let's talk about, people always look around them. They see a swimming pool or a golf course or, God forbid, a data center nearby. These are big consumptive uses, but relative to agriculture, not the big show, right? So help us understand as we walk through this conversation, you know, to borrow the phrase from Willie Sutton, who robbed banks because that's where the money is. Where is the water?
Yes, so the water is about 75% used in ag in the Colorado River Basin, about 25% municipal and ag. And of course, if you're going to have any solutions right now, of course, ag is going to get to help us very much.
Okay, and that is political third rail material when you start going after farmers. Politicians don't like doing that.
Yes, it is, but what you're talking about too is 1,500 farmers in the lower basin versus 5 million people in Phoenix or 20 million people in LA. You tell me who wins that battle.
I think we might know the answer. All right, Shannon Mullane has been gathering up questions from the readers of the Colorado Sun. And by the way, if you want to understand this story, you can read Brad Udall's papers, of course. But Shannon Mullane and the Colorado Sun do a fabulous job explaining it to a broad audience. So, Shannon, give me a sense of some questions that might be appropriate for Brad right now.
Sure, thanks, Miles. Brad, I'm going to ask you to just solve this entire thing right now. Here's a question from a Colorado Sun reader based in the Denver area. So how can we effectively rehydrate the Colorado River to heal the water and carbon cycles, cool local neighborhoods, and mitigate the climate emergency?
Sounds like terraforming almost, but in a local sense, I suppose planting trees and coming up with interesting ways of making a microclimate work might help.
Yeah,
is that right?
That might work on a local municipal sense. But you know, if you really want to solve this problem, you got to solve the greenhouse gas emission problem. And we're not doing it as humans. We're in fact blowing it. And the planet's getting warmer by the day and leading us to March like we had this year and more in the future.
So basically, we're geoengineering our way into the problem by putting CO2 in the atmosphere. Question from one of our NewsHour viewers, Heath from Washington, asks, realistically, at the rate the reservoir is being depleted, I presume he means Mead probably, how long before Las Vegas can no longer sustain its population and visitors? And this is an opportunity to point out how well cities have done here, I think.
So the history of municipalities in the Colorado River Basin over the last 25 and maybe even 50 years has been one of very much a success story. Las Vegas now has twice the population it had in 2000 and uses 2/3 of the water through various conservation measures, including cash for grass, where they pay people to actually take out grass. Las Vegas' story is not unique. It's actually told throughout the American West. So there are good stories there in our municipalities for sure.
All right, Shannon Mullane with one more question, I think, from Fort Collins. Let's get that one in if we can.
Sure. You know, this is from a reader who's just curious, and it might tie to what you were just talking about, but how can we prevent drought?
How can we prevent drought? You can't, actually. And in the world we're inhabiting right now, you hinted at this, the American West is aridifying. Not every year is warmer, not every year is drier, but that's where we're headed, and it's very clear scientifically that this is our future. And again, you want to avoid drought, you want to prevent drought, stop these emissions of greenhouse gases.
All right, the science to me seems pretty grim and clear. Not enough water, too many straws chasing too little water. That's fairly straightforward. Where it gets complex is in trying to understand what's called the law of the river, the Colorado River Compact, and all the codicils that have followed, right? And it's a tangled mess, and I don't want to take people too far down the road, except to say the fundamental disagreement right now is whether the cuts and how the cuts should be shared fully across the basin. The lower basin states would like mandatory cuts from the upper basin. The upper basin says, we're dealing with this drought right now. This 99-degree day is what we're dealing with every day. We're already dealing with cuts from Mother Nature. Sort that one out for us and help us understand whether this 100 years of layered regulations, whether it's time to rethink the whole thing.
So I'm going to argue that this is the first case globally where changes in the water cycle are going to force a fundamental rethink of water policy and water management. No other place on the planet is experiencing this right now, and it's right here, and we need to frankly ditch 100 years of international treaties and congressional legislation, compacts, and figure out a new way to get forward. These two basins are fundamentally different. The upper basin has thousands of users, the lower basin has about 100. The 100 users each have a federal contract. They're fed by a dam. It's much easier, and the federal government has the right to control what happens down there. They have much less the right to control what happens up here. It's two very separate problems. I will argue that both basins need to share this climate change risk in proportion to the amount of water they use.
Okay, but a rethink is a big deal.
A rethink is the deal. It's not a big deal. It is the deal, and it's part of the reason why we don't have an agreement right now. In 2007 and 2019, we actually had little interim agreements that were just tiny, well, comparatively tiny things. Right now, we need a fundamental rethink, and that's why the parties have not come to an agreement.
All right, I guess we need a constitutional convention for the river. Some of the people who are going to follow you here, we'll see what they have to say about that.
I have actually hoped that these folks will figure it out.
All right.
I do. I'm not so optimistic about climate, but I think we're going to get the Colorado River figured out.
Brad Udall, I really appreciate you making the trek across the mountains to come and spend some time with us and help us understand this problem.
My pleasure, Miles.
All right. This past winter was a particularly punishing one for Colorado River, as Brad alluded to. It was unusually warm and dry, and record heat in March melted much of the mountain snowpack far earlier than normal. For farmers in the upper basin, it means less water flowing downstream just when they need it the most, forcing them to make some drastic choices about what to plant, what to leave fallow, and how long they can continue a way of life that has endured here for generations. Reed Fishering grows sweet corn in Delta County, Colorado. As we walked his farm, he showed me the stark line between the fields he was able to plant this year and those he was forced to leave fallow. The unusually warm, dry winter of 2025-2026 decimated the snowpack, which fills the streams that deliver precious water to his fields. It has left him and many farmers on the western slope of Colorado with half of the allotment of water they would normally receive.
This shows the demarcation line of, possible money versus us having to just sit fallow and not make any money on it. So this kind of represents our economic outlook for 2026.
He's thought long and hard about the Colorado River Compact of 1922 and its fairness more than 100 years later in the midst of an epic drought fueled by climate change. What are the flaws in the way this river is shared up and down the system that are being laid bare right now?
The upper basin has to ensure that the lower basin is receiving their 7.5 million acre feet. Well, okay, that's all well and good, but if you don't have that in the mountains, I don't know how that is equitable for all parties involved that's on the same Colorado River that we're talking about.
So the compact doesn't account for a winter like this, does it?
Situations like this. Yeah, it made sense at the time, looking at some historical data that they had in front of them. But yeah, in today's world, it does not account for what Mother Nature provides for us. And we, as the Upper Basin, we feel like we kind of adhere to what Mother Nature tells us, and if there's not enough snowpack, we curtail our usement. And we've been doing this for numerous years. You can't squeeze any more out of this than what she'll provide, and so I think that it's just become irrational to think that the compact that was written in 1922 should have a precedence on where we are today. I think we're all smarter than that and understand the flaws that existed in it, and we should be able to come up to an agreement on what makes sense for everybody.
If you follow the letter of the law in the compact, you all would have to absolutely cease farming in order to deliver that 7.5 million, right?
Yeah, we would have to cease farming, but not only cease farming, but you wouldn't even have drinking water. In the compact, if you're looking at the letter of the law, everything has to go down to the lower basin before we can have any of it. And I don't know if that was their intent when they were writing this thing, but by gosh, that's where the lawyers have said that this is where it needs to be. And
so whether it was purposeful or not, do you feel the way the river is shared favors the lower basin states?
Absolutely. We're just, the way that we look at it is we're just the bank, and then they have the ATM, and we have to make sure that we have enough water in there for them to pull out the water, and then we get what is left over.
All right, our next guest has a little quibble with that statement. We're going to get that straightened out here right now. Becky Mitchell is Colorado's commissioner to the Upper Colorado River Commission, and she's been a leading voice for the Upper Basin states as they resist calls from the Lower Basin to accept mandatory cuts in water use as part of a new agreement for sharing the shrinking river. Becky, thanks for making the trip here to Grand Junction. It's good to have you right beside the river here, not far from the headwaters. First of all, let's clarify what Reed said. There's a lot of misconceptions about what the Upper Basin is supposed to deliver to the Lower Basin. It's not, and first of all, would you view it as a delivery commitment, and how much are you committed to delivering?
Well, there's a lot of nuance in the language of the compact, and I think...
Devilish nuance, you might say. Yes,
nuance,
yeah.
Some would say. And so I think there's going to be a lot of interpretation on that. What we hope is that we can find a deal so that we don't have to fight about that in the Supreme Court, and that we're able to come up with a deal across the 7 basin states. Okay,
so will the Upper Basin commit to any sort of delivery number?
So that's not what the compact, essentially, that's not the intention of the compact. The compact had an equity component of it, and that's incredibly important to us. But I think what's even more important is...
Interpret that for me, though. When you say it's not a delivery commitment, what is it?
It is a commitment to not cause a depletion.
Okay.
And so...
So you won't cause it to be less.
And as you can see, our uses are not anywhere near what the Lower Basin's uses are, and there's a reason for that.
Right.
And the reason is look behind us. When it's not there, it's not there. And so what I can't promise is to deliver water when it's not there. Nobody can. You can't. Even you, Miles, cannot promise to deliver water when it's not there.
So it really some of this has to do with where you're pointing the finger on who the culprit is. Is it Mother Nature and the drought and the lack of rainfall? Or is it the farmers that are using what little water there is available? Is that your thinking on this?
No, not at all. Not at all. So thank you for asking that question. I think what the culprit is that we have a shrinking pie, and we all need to adapt to it. And I think we have some examples of that. We have examples of how we operate up here as an example of a way to operate when the pie is shrinking. Whether you're junior, whether you're senior in the Upper Basin, you know that it's a variable supply and you modify based on that.
Well, so variable supply, that's an important point. You know, the way the law is written, it's very etched in stone, built on specific numbers that may or may not be real. In some cases, very much not real. Why not come up with a plan where you hinge whatever you deliver to the lower basin based on the variability at some percentage or sliding scale, but that would be locked in stone in some way so that the lower basin could at least be assured that you're doing your best effort given the hydrology?
I think there probably needs to be some more discussion on that. And I think some of our negotiations tried to get there. We tried to have some discussions on that, and it's pretty difficult. What I do know is that we all have to adjust to this variability. We also have to adjust to the changing hydrology. We absolutely do. This year is a perfect example of that.
Well, so if you have to adjust away. Put something on the table here. What could you do to make the lower basin feel as if you are in the game in some meaningful, concrete way?
So when you say that, you're assuming that we're not making cuts or not making mandatory cuts, and I think that is a major flaw. Because this year, again, perfect example. When your uses vary anywhere between just over 3 to 5 million acre feet, that's happening because we're making cuts. We're making cuts on the ground. When you heard the Assistant Secretary, Andrea Travnik, talk about being the water master in the lower basin, we have a couple water masters in the upper basin, one being the state engineer who administers those water rights, and then we also have Mother Nature, who's far more fierce than the federal government will ever be, and she has been rough. She has been incredibly difficult on us. And again, I have examples from behind us where folks are trying to be able to save enough to even just finish their crops, to be able to put those trees in hibernation. We have communities working together to do those things, to get through years like this and hope for better years. But we're prepared when these bad years come. We don't expect a consistent amount of water.
I understood. So, but some would look at that and say, well, that's just the nature of a drought and hydrology. Those aren't cuts. Those are just responding to what nature has provided. Isn't there some way you can assure the lower basin that you will take a relative piece of the pie that is not outsized relative to what's available?
I think you should look first at the cuts that we are taking because of Mother Nature and use those to reflect the cuts that are needed across the basin. And if you told Reed Fishering, who you just had on video, that those were not cuts, that his family wasn't impacted, if you tell his neighbor that those are cuts. Those are true and honest cuts, and they've been implemented by the hydrology.
So when you say that, though, it kind of falls on deaf ears with your lower basin counterparts.
That's rough.
They want something in paper saying you're going to cut in a mandatory way. Isn't there some way to find common ground here between these two ideas?
I think you can. I think one of the first things we should do is look at what's happening up here and use that as a little bit of a go-by of what's needed across the basin, looking at what the hydrology is saying and what is needed. And we show that every year.
Shannon Mullane is up here all the time. She talks to these farmers. She probably has met Reed himself, I know. I'm pretty good chance of that. Shannon, let's weigh in with a question from one of your Colorado Sun readers.
Yeah, of course. So this is a question that relates to Colorado for sure, but likely the other basin communities. So Harry of Denver is asking, how is the drought impacting the state's ability to grow? How many people can we realistically accommodate? And what would that cap mean moving forward?
We able to hear that okay?
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think I heard that,
Okay,
and so I'm going to take a stab at it. And the question was more about how is this drought impacting how we grow? And I think that's a question that all 7 states have to ask themselves. Have we grown too quickly? We feel like we have been responsible here because we've lived within the means of the Mother Nature and the means of the river. But it obviously you can't develop without a certain supply. And economic prosperity comes from certainty. And so how that happens, each state has to make their own decisions on how many risks they're willing to take. They have to get their budget in order, and that's what we've been doing in Colorado. We have examples of when folks think they have a supply. Our most junior and most senior water users are working together because folks thought they had a certain supply and they don't. And so it really is up to each state to figure out how they do that. I don't want to tell other states how to do it, but I can tell you how we do it in our state. You have to come in with a 100-year water supply if you're going to develop, and you have to know where that's coming from.
All right, if we could indulge the viewers, I'm going to talk about structural deficit now.
Great, yeah.
Yeah, let's get the lingo going here. What that is evaporation and system losses.
Transit losses.
Which impacts more those big reservoirs sitting in the desert. There's a lot of evaporation. Up until very recently, that amount of water is well over 1 million acre feet a year, I guess, 1.2. Has not been on the accounting for the lower basin. Now, the lower basin has agreed to bridge that structural deficit. That to me seems like a significant peace offering here after years of resisting it, and it has thrown in some additional real cuts, which get it up over 3 million acre feet as ways to conserve. Those are significant cuts. That's real water on the table. I think they're tossing you a bone, Becky. Do you have anything you can toss them back?
So thank you for that question. And I think first and foremost, you're right. It was kind of messed in the accounting. So when you think about the fact that evaporation and transit losses hasn't up to this point even been factored in, that's part of the problem. If we could have had that as part of the equation throughout these last 20 years of drought, we'd be in a much different spot.
All right, well, we can't turn back the clock.
No, we cannot.
This is what we're dealing with now.
So we deal with evaporation and transit losses in the upper basin. We account for those, and evaporation is happening, and that's part of our use numbers up here. And so I think it is important, and I applaud the lower basin for doing that. And what we did put on the table is we said we can agree to create a contribution program and look at ways that we can do things in a voluntary way, because we can't commit to making cuts when we are not certain the water is going to be here.
But so again, if I know that the M word, mandatory, is a third rail word, but if those cuts that you commit to are somehow based on hydrology, that they slide somehow with the available supply, what's the matter with that?
So the problem is we don't necessarily know what's going to happen with hydrology. And so we need to be prepared for all things, and we are making those cuts. And I think first and foremost, we have to acknowledge the cuts that are happening. I think we're talking about the bone that was given by the lower basin in terms of finally accounting for evap and transit losses. I think the bone of acknowledging the way that we live up here and the way that we live is responsible, because we've responded to what hydrology is what's happening with hydrology. Our numbers are often far greater than the 1.2 or 1.3 that you mentioned of evap and transit losses in the lower basin. Oftentimes our shortages are far greater than that. And this year, perfect example. We expect it's going to be far greater than that.
Okay, so you're not seeing a compromise, I gather.
I do. I continue to see a compromise. Like I wouldn't be still doing this if I didn't have hope. I think we have to acknowledge the pie is smaller. We have to figure out how to balance demand and supply. We have to figure out how to not consistently release more from the reservoirs than what comes in. We have to get there, and then I think we can build some more flexible programs, but we have to acknowledge the reality that is hydrology.
All right, if it's catastrophic hydrology and you have no commitments for cuts and you do your thing and it's going to cause Lake Powell to collapse into a dead pool, you going to let that happen?
Nobody wants that to happen, and that's part of the reason we've taken the actions this year with the releases from the upper initial units. So Flaming Gorge is releasing 1 million acre feet this year.
This is a big reservoir up in this neighborhood.
Well, Yeah.
Ish.
Ish.
All right.
Not in like it's small in comparison.
All right, we're going to get you together with your counterparts shortly, and we're going to see if this marriage can be saved, so to speak, right? And thank you for this.
Maybe it's just an amicable separation.
maybe so. Becky works closely with Colorado State Engineer Jason Ullman as they manage this increasingly scarce resource, and this year has been especially difficult. A few months ago, Jason introduced me to some Western Slope farmers and showed me firsthand what a shrinking river means to them. These are the headwaters of the Colorado River. The water in these streams starts as snow high in the mountains that surround the valley. But this year, nature came up short. A drier, warmer winter was followed by an exceptionally hot March, triggering an early melt. By May, about 70% of the snowpack had already disappeared.
Our biggest reservoir in Colorado is the snowpack. This year was shocking.
Jason Ullman is the state engineer. He is responsible for managing one of Colorado's most precious resources, water. He took me on a tour of the Uncompahgre River Valley, a tributary of the Colorado. How would you characterize that river relative to other springs?
So we would expect there to be hundreds of cubic feet per second here. This is approximately 4 CFS. So very low for this time of year.
With stream flows dwindling, Ullman and his team face an unenviable task, shutting off water deliveries to the valley's 85,000 acres of irrigated farmland based on seniority. Not far from Hugh Sandberg's ranch, Chan Fogg tends a 60-acre orchard of nearly 30,000 apple, pear, and peach trees.
Everything that we do, we have to have snowpack. And without the snowpack, we have a drought. Instead of bins of apples this year, we'll have pounds of apples.
He says it takes about 30 inches of water to produce a healthy, profitable crop. 20 inches is the bare minimum just to keep the trees alive.
We don't have a choice of not irrigating, because if you don't irrigate, the trees die and you've lost your lifetime investment.
So this is all apples?
This is peaches on this side and apples over here.
I got you. Chan Fogg has worked hard to get by with less water. He showed me his ingenious system.
This is the ditch that supplies our water, Child's Ditch.
Water travels through a buried pipe to a pump system that Isaac Newton would appreciate. Gravity does all the work.
This gauge over here is a flow meter, and it shows that we're using 168 gallons a minute right now.
The pumps feed a micro sprinkler irrigation system. He installed it a decade ago thanks to some federal grant money.
It's just a lot more efficient, and you get the same amount of water from the top of the orchard to the bottom.
And do you use less water with it?
Oh, considerably less, yeah. Probably less than a third as much water.
All right, let's go see how you irrigate all these things, huh? It's not enough to erase his worries, but this spring's wild weather may have offered Chan one small silver lining. The March heat wave brought his fruit trees into bloom weeks early. Then came a hard freeze in April, wiping out his nascent fruit. Crop insurance softened the financial blow. And ironically, fruitless trees need far less water.
The trees will get stressed, but they won't, if we just keep a minimal amount of water on them, they'll make it through the year.
Fogg and other farmers here are able to purchase water from a string of small reservoirs in the mountains nearby. But they provide a cushion for only one dry year.
If we have another year after this year, like this year, it's going to be a lot more painful than it is even this year. They'll just be completely off.
Another winter like the last one could spell even more serious trouble for the Colorado River. Many of the farmers I spoke with are hoping the coming El Nino will deliver badly needed snow and rain. That will offer a temporary reprieve, but it won't make up the underlying problem. It won't make it go away. There is simply less water in this river than the people who depend on it have grown accustomed to using. So, where does a lasting solution lie? Joining us now is Tanya Trujillo. She is the Deputy State Engineer for New Mexico and the state's representative on the Upper Colorado River Commission. Tanya brings an unusually broad perspective to the debate. Before returning to New Mexico, she served as Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior during the Biden administration, the same job Andrea Travnik holds today. We just heard from her. She also served as Director of the Colorado River Board of California. Tanya Trujillo, you are a multi-basin kind of person, for sure.
Yes.
So when you took your job in New Mexico, back home, you said, we're in a crisis. Did you mean a hydrology crisis, an environmental crisis, or a political crisis?
I think right now the conditions are so severe that we're in a crisis across the board. And we've heard how bad the hydrology is right now. We also have a problem with the negotiations among the states that have been at loggerheads, like you said.
Loggerheads, that's the word, isn't it?
It's something that we need to work on and try to get us back to the table.
Brian in Colorado from the NewsHour folks has this. The impasse in negotiations seems to hinge on whether the upper basin states would cut back usage in dry years. What would be the practical impact of the upper basin agreeing to a version of the cuts proposed by the lower basin states? Who would go without water and at what magnitude?
Well, one thing I think we should think about is stop pointing fingers at each other about this issue. We have a reduced supply, and we need to figure out how to equitably share that reduced supply. And so in terms of how to divide up that pie is what we need to work on. And I think we have technical experts that can help us get to that equation.
All right, your counterpart, Becky Mitchell, just said we're willing to voluntarily cut. But you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? It's good to have, you know, trust but verify kind of things. Measurable enforcement actions. First of all, from New Mexico's perspective, is that something New Mexico can accept? You know, I realize mandatory is kind of a charged word, but something like that.
Well, in New Mexico, we did a study recently where we had our scientists tell us what our future was going to look like. They predicted continued hotter and drier years. And so we've undertaken a project called our 50-Year Water Action Plan, which is going to enable us to reduce water uses without anybody forcing us to do that, reduce water uses on the order of 25%, and that's across the board, across all sectors. And we're also going to be looking for new water supplies. So that's going to help make up for the reductions that we're going to have to take.
So you can agree to something kind of written in paper, if not stone?
Yeah, the states need to get together on a new agreement, and we're willing to work on that with our partners.
Mandatory cuts, you'll do that?
Well, we're willing to work on that for sure.
What would you call them?
I think we have to reduce consumption across all the states, across all the sectors. And that's something that we're going to be willing to talk with the others about.
In a firm way, not just voluntary. Okay.
Yes.
All right, Shannon Mullane, Colorado Sun. Weigh in on this one. It sounds like Tanya might be a peacemaker here. She straddles both basins. Go ahead.
Well, so here's a question from a reader in Colorado. His name is Adam. He says, while I'm certainly not against water conservation on an individual level, how can individuals be expected to care when the Colorado River Basin is feeding golf courses in the deserts of the basin states?
So this comes up all the time. People look around, they see golf courses, they see data centers, they see swimming pools, and think, this is the problem. It might miss the point a little bit, right?
Well, as water managers, we have to think about all the different sectors that are fueling our economies, and we have different economies in different states, and we have to figure out how to share the water across the board. And so trying to encourage conservation and water recycling, for example, is a great way to help encourage golf industry through recycled water use there, but also make sure that our cities have supplies and our farm communities have supplies as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk right now. People always bring up desalination, but extremely expensive. The one I've heard a little bit more talk about lately, which is very interesting, is advanced water treatment, which is kind of a fully recycled water treatment system, which people got, you know, so there's a certain ick factor to that. But if you think about it, water is recycled at a larger scale anyway. Are those the kinds of things that should be looked at up and down the basin? And you know, as important as they might be long term, they're not going to solve the immediate crisis, are they?
Well, we need to have as many tools as possible. Trying to use the technologies that are available makes a lot of sense. So if we can we can have energy efficient water recycling, we can develop better treatment processes, better filtration processes, try to make the most of the available resources that we have is, again, what we need to do, whether we're upper basin, lower basin, all of us have to try to be looking for these tools.
And so will you say, sort of say plainly that if the reservoirs are in jeopardy of, a dead pool scenario or something terrible, the upper basin will commit to not allowing that to happen?
Well, in the upper basin, we have to be thinking about protecting our water uses and our water users. We have to be thinking about protecting a larger supply in our reservoirs. The question of Glen Canyon and Lake Powell is a big question for us. What are the tools we have available for that? And we have to figure out accounting for the lower basin. Again, sharing the resource in an equitable way with our partners across the borders.
Eric from Utah has a good question. Given that we can't fill either Lake Powell or Lake Mead, and that the reservoirs and dams are on the cusp of their infrastructure limits, doesn't it make sense to start taking a serious look at combining the storage into one reservoir? Could that save Lake Mead, sacrificing Lake Powell, the upriver dam?
Well, I would encourage us to think as creatively as possible. And there have been some proposals for how we can do more of the good thinking about better use and management of the available supply. So I want us to be thinking about those options. Our tools are limited right now. We need to be brainstorming and working together on what we can do together.
Shannon Mullane, you have another question from a Colorado Sun reader.
Yeah, I do. We're talking a lot about these big system solutions, and this reader from Fort Collins is actually wondering, what can the individual do? Can individual homeowners actually make a difference, or is the problem really an issue of large industry users?
Yeah, this is one of those big problems, like climate change itself. It's so big, people feel like they can't. There's no levers to do anything. What do you tell people?
Well, this is a question that we're dealing with in New Mexico right now. And again, we have to try to make sure that people know they can make a difference. And so individual communities have systems. If they can reduce water in that system, that translates into helping up and down the particular basin that they might be in. And so we're undertaking a water education campaign to make sure people know where their water comes from, how they can take care of it, and what we can do to try to help with the situation.
You have a lot of tribal nations in your part of the world, and one of the big sin of omission, is that the original compact in 1922, Native Americans weren't even at the table. There's a long history there that we don't have time to go into, but the fact is it's high time to redress that. But as the river shrinks and the demand grows, is it possible to square that circle and provide water, in some cases very senior rights from the tribal nations, provide the water they deserve?
Well, this is a subject that's near and dear to me personally. I've worked on tribal water issues my whole career, and I think over the past 20 years we've made some improvements in the Colorado River Basin, but we still need to do much more. And our tribal partners can be really important elements to how we solve some of these puzzles. So we need to be thinking creatively and make sure we do take care of our tribal communities and hold the United States, to their commitments as well.
All right, Tanya, I think somebody with a car alarm wants this interview to end, so we're going to move on. We're going to have you back here shortly, so we'll see. We got you warmed up. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to the lower basin, and in particular to the single largest user of Colorado River water, California's Imperial Valley. This is some of the most productive farmland in the U.S., but it could not exist without water from the Colorado River.
The incongruous, almost magical nature of this lush oasis in the desert really dawned on me during a visit to Gina Dockstadter's citrus grove.
What do you think, Lalo? You want to pick one off for us?
There's one right here.
Yeah.
There we go.
It was January, early morning, not long after sunrise, when she gave me a fresh as it gets taste test. We sampled some organic Mineolas.
All right, so what's the proper way to eat it?
Well, we could have sectioned it, but yeah, just the juice is great.
Oh, that's delicious.
Citrus isn't the big story here. Vegetables are. About 2/3 of the winter produce sold in the U.S. is grown here.
Fine looking lemons here.
Need some lemonade, huh?
Gina took me to her family's packing plant.
This is a place that can produce a lot of food in a very relatively small area, right?
Right. High economic value in a small area.
Besides citrus, her family grows dates and, like just about everyone here, alfalfa and Bermuda grass, both of which get bundled up into hay bales to be fed to livestock.
You can't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Otherwise, how do you make it from year to year?
No crop demands more Colorado River water than alfalfa. Farmers across the basin use roughly 5 to 6 million acre-feet a year to grow hay for cattle and dairy operations. The Imperial Valley is one of the world's most productive hay-growing regions. Thanks to a year-round growing season and easy access to Pacific ports, as much as half of its alfalfa is exported to Asia and the Middle East. Controversial destinations for a crop irrigated by one of America's most stressed rivers. You're kind of shipping the Colorado River to other countries.
Right.
What do farmers say to that?
I will say, do you like your leather belt? Do you like your tennis shoes? Do you like the modern conveniences that you have in your life that's coming from these places because they're feeding their cattle and that's how you're getting leather products back into the United States?
Alfalfa is a thirsty crop, and the fact that a significant share of it ultimately leaves the country doesn't sit well with many people. But Gina says folks in the Imperial Valley are accustomed to being in the crosshairs.
We've always felt that other people were looking at our water because we have such a significant priority right. You think municipalities are going to come in, you think the cities are going to come and take our water.
That's exactly what happened in 2003. As it became clear the Colorado River could no longer meet all the demands placed on it, the federal government required California to live within its legal allocation. The result was the Quantification Settlement Agreement, or QSA. It requires the Imperial Irrigation District to transfer water to San Diego. In return, the San Diego County Water Authority helps fund conservation projects that enable farmers to use less water while keeping much of their land in production.
Now I can pay for a sprinkler pipe, I can sprinkle, I can use less water to grow the same crop, and that's how the water gets created. We're getting smarter. Farmers are resilient. We all know we have to do more with less.
Doing more with less may be asking us to defy the laws of gravity. Doing less with less may be more likely. And that brings us to our next guest, J.B. Hamby, who sits on the board of the Imperial Irrigation District, the single largest user of Colorado River water. He also serves as California's Colorado River Commissioner. And that puts him at the center of this debate, representing both the farmers of the Imperial Valley and a state with an enormous stake in how this shrinking river is divided. JB, welcome back to Tipping Point. You are a veteran of this program. We appreciate you making the effort one more time.
Thanks, Miles.
So let's talk about your the Lower Basin recent proposal on the table. And one of the key things that you addressed, we talked about it with Becky, is this idea of structural deficit, which is evaporation and just what gets lost down the pipeline, so to speak. And for years and years, that was not on your ledger. Now you're accepting that as part of it. First of all, why did that take so long, and what caused the change?
That's a good question. I guess I'll start by talking about where we're ending right now, the 2007 guidelines, and why this is such a cornerstone for post-26. Back in 2007 guidelines, there were two big blank spots that the basin states needed to get together and answer. One of them was, how do we deal with shortage in the lower basin states? And the other one was, how do we deal with flows past Leaf Erie? That's the compact defining point of how much water needs to come from the upper basin, so lower basin in Mexico. The states made good progress on both of those back in 2007, and in the former, the lower basin states of Arizona and Nevada, as well as Mexico, came together to put 600,000 acre-feet on the table for reductions. What we've seen over the past number of years is that that number simply isn't enough, and even when the lower basin is receiving our compact compliant releases from the upper basin for lower basin states and Mexico, there exists a deficit of about 1.1 to 1.2 million acre-feet a year. So when we
that's what we call the structural deficit, essentially.
That's right, in the lower basin in Mexico. So early on, we jumped in and we said, you know, we need to not just try to reduce the severity of shortages or the amount of them occurring, but we really need to resolve the whole problem there. So we, as the lower basin states, Arizona, California, Nevada, came together and said, let's put 1.25 million acre-feet on the table with a 0.25 amount from Mexico as well. That exceeds the structural deficit and starts to replenish Lake Mead, which is our lifeline.
So that's a significant moment. Where does that water come from? Is it spread across the 3 states?
So we had a number of difficult negotiations and discussions, but I think what the core function really between us and Arizona, California, Arizona, our 2 states had the longest case in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court. So myself and my colleague Tom Bishotsky led our respective teams to, in 2024, ultimately ink this deal, which is eliminating the structural deficit and exceeding it. So 440 from California, 760 Arizona, 50 Nevada, and then an assumed 250,000 acre-feet from Mexico as well.
Now, you've also put some additional cuts in the mix. I think it comes out to about 3.9 million acre-feet. Is that right? Tell me about that.
So I think that's the crux of the matter. While we in the lower basin, and there's good work.
I'm sorry, yes,
yeah.
I'm not saying it correctly. What you're asking for is basin-wide cuts at that number, correct?
Sure. I think what we need to be looking for in the long term is, while we're dealing in the lower basin with our compact compliant release structural deficit, we need to be prepared when that 1.5 number simply isn't enough. And at that point, that's going to require both basins and both countries to be able to resolve this problem.
Okay, and this is where it comes to the real rub when you ask the upper
That's
basin.
right.
Becky and the other upper basin folks to give us something concrete to ensure that these cuts, now that this structural deficit has been taken care of, that these cuts go up and down the basin. What Becky would say if she was sitting here right now, and so you'll get a chance to talk to her when we all get together here in a moment, what she would say is we're taking cuts daily from Mother Nature. Why doesn't that work from the lower basin perspective?
So that's a good question, and don't dispute whatsoever the fact that folks here in the upper basin, Colorado, any of the upper basin states experience shortages and users take cuts. But let's be clear about what those cuts are for. So whether it's here in Grand Valley or in the Uncompahgre Valley south of us here, you have a priority system. You have senior users who are never cut, and you have junior users who are sometimes cut every single year and only occasionally get water. But that water that's being cut by their state engineers is being used to cut one in order to satisfy another. That water that's being cut by those state engineers doesn't end up in the Colorado River, make its way down to Lake Powell, past Lee Ferry, into the lower basin. So what we really need to resolve is we've really solved this big problem about the structural deficit in the lower basin, how the lower basin and Mexico are going to step up for reductions. But what we haven't resolved is this Lee Ferry question, this question of the compact. While there was an equitable sharing back in the 1922 compact, we know that we're going to have to do something different moving forward, and it's best to solve that by negotiation.
Do you believe that the Colorado River Compact guarantees a delivery of water to the midpoint, Lee's Ferry, and the lower basin?
Yes, it does, and that's pretty clear both in the 22 compact, 75 million acre feet over a 10-year period to the lower basin. It also talks about each basin sharing half of the Mexico obligation, 1.5 million acre feet. So that works out, roughly speaking, to 8.25 million acre feet a year. But we know the river isn't anywhere near as producing as much as it was when this river was allocated back in 1922. So absent doing something different, that puts all of the pressure on the upper basin to have to deliver that fixed quantity of water, even at their full expense to deliver that fixed amount to the lower basin. We think that there's a better way.
If the water's not there, the water's not there. What happens then?
there's still water being used in the upper basin. And to be clear, and while California is the largest state using water on the Colorado River, we also have the most productive agriculture in the basin. We have half the basin's population. Between the 4 upper basin states, on any given year for the most part, the upper basin can use as much as 5 million acre-feet sometimes, which dwarfs California's use. So it really takes every state to contribute to the solution.
Should a farmer in this part of the world be put out of business to keep the rapid growth of Arizona continuing? That's kind of the argument that comes out here.
Right. I don't think we want to see anybody go out of business, but I think on the flip side of the coin, what we've seen with some scenarios that puts all of the risk on the lower basin or puts all of the risk on Arizona is eliminating modern life in Arizona as we know it, and we know that that's not practical, just as we don't want to put people out of business in Colorado. What we need is a fair-minded, negotiated agreement that's fair, practical, brings resources to the table, and gets us to a voluntary place to share this resource that's diminishing, that we need to spend our time finding solutions and not fighting.
You said voluntary. What you want is mandatory. Explain, what do those mandatory cuts look like in a way that recognizes the variability that nature is presenting to us as this part of the world aridifies?
It's a good question, and I think there's no better set of examples than in California. We, in 1 year, from 1 year to the next, we're able to reduce our uses by 800,000 acre-feet. That's an enormous thing. That was all done by agreements voluntarily entered into. It was tough negotiating back when that was done in 2003. But we have all of our agencies in California working together to be able to, on an annual basis, reduce our use by that amount. And now we're putting even more water on the table to do what's necessary to live with the resource that we have, not the one we wish we had.
A lot of those cuts had some money attached to them, either in trades with municipalities or federal subsidies. That is not a long-term solution, because I know some of the federal stuff is starting to dry up even as we speak. Is this a problem that can be solved by a committed federal investment up and down the basement to subsidize the conservation, or perhaps encourage fallowing or planting crops that are less thirsty, or maybe encouraging that old farmer to go out of business? In other words, do we need a little more of a federal footprint out here? And I know people in the West hate that idea, but is that the only way to truly solve this, to subsidize people who will be harmed by the fact that there's less and less water?
I think that what we have is a massive problem, and it's going to take a big reckoning, one that we didn't expect in 2007, and now that we're looking to the future, we know there is a lot less water available for us. It's going to take resources. It can be resources from individual users, individual agencies, individual states, but certainly the support, like we've seen very successfully from the United States, both the past administration and this one, has been instrumental in being able to deal with our near-term challenges and present us a good roadmap for the future as well.
All right, let's button it up with a question from Shannon Mullane, who's watching what the readers of the Colorado Sun, they're very smart readers, I think. They really know what they're talking about. She has a question from them.
Yeah, thank you. JB, can you speak a little bit more directly to agriculture? We're getting a lot of questions about that. Here's a reader in Greeley, Colorado. The reader says, how is California pushing agriculture producers to shift to water conservation methods, for example, with crops and livestock?
It's a great question. I'll just give an overview of some of our producers in California. In the Palo Verde Valley, there is a long-running program with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, the largest water provider, urban water provider in the country. That's been a successful program for the Palo Verde Irrigation District and Metropolitan. In the Imperial Valley, there's significantly sized programs with the San Diego County Water Authority that involve large-scale on-farm efficiency conservation programs. More crop, less drops, and it's been a mutually beneficial program. In the Bard Water District and the Fort Yuma-Quezon Indian Tribe, similarly good programs with Metropolitan, and Coachella Valley Water District has done large-scale efficiency improvements in agriculture.
Might be good if that happens up and down the basin a little bit more, but that does take money and encouraging municipalities to do some water trades with ag. A little bit of federal support would help, wouldn't it?
It would. I think both support and pressure, whether it's politically applied or by Mother Nature, I think what we need to see is the very sort of blueprint that California has made possible spread throughout the basin.
All right, from your perspective, what does a deal look like?
I think what a deal looks like is a fair deal, one that doesn't put all of the burden on one basin or another. We know the burden that the compact puts upon the upper basin, but we need a fair and equitable approach to deal with the supply that exists. And I think we're on track to be able to get to that. We just have to have the willingness within each state to recognize everybody needs to reduce use and no one can sit this out.
You really think you're on track? It seems like you're on track to the Supreme Court, JB.
Well, that would not be a good place to end up. California and Arizona spent a lot of time there, and I think there's a lot better solutions that we can find.
All right, JB, don't go away. We're going to get you back with the lightning round in just a little bit. I appreciate you making the effort to be here.
Thanks, Miles.
The Imperial Valley sits largely below sea level, allowing Colorado River water to flow by gravity through a vast network of canals into its farms. For generations, farmers have relied heavily on flood irrigation, opening gates and letting gravity carry water across their fields. It's simple, reliable, and inexpensive, but in a river system where every drop increasingly matters, there are more efficient ways to irrigate. And some Imperial Valley farmers are making that transition using techniques such as sprinklers, laser leveling, and drip irrigation. At the Jack Brothers Ranch in the Imperial Valley, stacks of pipe once used to irrigate crops by flooding the fields have sat untouched for 6 years. Owner and president Alex Jack has turned to a more precise approach. He's become a leading voice for drip irrigation in the Imperial Valley.
People call you a drip at times? They normally much worse.
On lettuce fields that yielded 900 cartons per acre using flood irrigation, he now harvests 1,550 cartons, nearly twice the yield per acre.
Our yields have gone up, obviously, but our water's so cheap, you don't really need to conserve water.
The price? About $20 per acre foot. That's roughly 0.06 of a cent per gallon. And yet Alex is conserving a lot of it.
So what is this a field of?
This is Tuscan varieties.
Well, show me how this works. Let's see how it goes.
He walked me through the dripping, oozing labyrinth in one of his lettuce fields.
So it's just oozing just beneath the surface.
And then underneath the surface, it's got emitters about every 8 inches apart. And so this right here is getting within 95% of what it's getting at the end of the field. So it's like farming with an eyedropper.
The system is ideally suited for high-value crops, but he's now experimenting with it on alfalfa. Drip irrigation is gentler on the crop, extending its life, so fields only need to be rotated every 12 years instead of every 4.
It takes probably $400 an acre to tear this old crop out to get ready for the new crop.
Right.
So if you can keep this in to the equivalent of 3 alfalfa crops, you've saved yourself $800 to $1,000 an acre just by not having to spend all the diesel and tractor work.
Saving water was not Alex's primary goal. Instead, it's a virtuous byproduct of his effort to improve his bottom line. But with water so cheap, what he is doing is uncommon here.
How would you incentivize more of what you're doing?
The people that see it like it, but the infrastructure on drip is expensive.
All of this cost him about $3 million. He's lucky he can do it without any debt. That kind of investment in infrastructure is too much of a burden for many farmers here.
They can't afford the payments. And so they can't get there. There's not that much money in agriculture. There's some years that are very good, but there's a lot of years where it's very bad. So whatever you made, 2-3 years ago, you gave back in one season.
The upfront investment may be steep, insurmountably so for many, but Alex Jack says he's proving there is eventually a payoff with more crops, more profit, and less water used in the process.
The Imperial Valley could actually produce more with less water, in theory.
Oh, absolutely. But it goes back to the old analogy, the 1960s. People had big motors, burning rubber and all that. They didn't care because gas was so cheap. When our water is this cheap and we have gravity flow, Why would someone want to go out and spend millions of dollars on something that's already very cheap?
And figuring out how we can move forward together.
Water may be relatively cheap here in the West, but it is certainly precious. And when the Colorado River runs short, priority matters. Those with the most junior rights are generally the first to feel the cuts. Now that puts Arizona in a particularly vulnerable position. Much of its Colorado River water is delivered through the Central Arizona Project, which has junior priority compared with many other users along the river itself. And within the CAP system, farmers and other lower priority users are among the first to lose water when shortages deepen. So the federal government's latest plan could have significant consequences in a state, the state 48 that is, for agriculture, and as shortages deepen, potentially for other water users as well. Now, few people understand those stakes better than Tom Bushatska. He is the director of the Arizona Department of Water Resources, Arizona's principal negotiator on Colorado River issues. He is the dean of Colorado River Commissioners. He's what they call around here a water buffalo, which is a compliment, I'm told, right?
We hope so.
All right. So, Tom, you've been around negotiations since what year?
Probably 2002.
2002. So pretty much the extent of the drought. Interesting coincidence there. Why do you think an agreement eludes you all this time? What is different?
So I think what's different is that in the past, the reductions we had to take to stabilize this river were small enough and didn't hit as many stakeholders as the reductions we are now. And so the challenge now is to find a path forward in which everyone that benefits from this river reduces their use to protect the river.
So in short, basically it's easy to do a negotiation when there's plenty of water, and when there's less, it's much harder. Simple as that.
Well, plenty may not be the word, but reductions that you can deal with and that you've been planning for decades based on the law of the river.
Okay, so you and the other lower basin states, JB and others, have put out a deal which acknowledges this so-called structural deficit, which has been a long time thorn in the process. First of all, why did it take so long to get that done?
So I just think it was a recognition of the fact that probably with the water supplies that were being produced by Mother Nature, we didn't need to. But again, that is based in federal law and the Supreme Court decision in the litigation that JB referred to in his remarks.
Okay, so what the fundamental issue from your perspective, I gather, is similar to what JB was saying. You want something, on paper and mandatory in the way of cuts from the upper basin. What does that look like in a situation where you have this epic drought, which seems to be continuing, and the water supply itself is so unpredictable? How do you put something that's mandatory and concrete against an environmental situation that is so difficult to predict?
So again, we heard earlier that in the upper basin, their use varies from 3 to 5 million acre feet. So within that context, you should be able to look at a number and put on the table a mandatory number that you can achieve. It's not like there's no water here, right? So it's not unreasonable. We asked them for a number somewhere in the range of 2% as a number the lower basin asked for, and we couldn't get there.
So, I'm sorry, 2% of what number?
2% of what the upper basin uses.
2%. That's that. If Becky came out here and said, "I'll give you 2%," you'd have a deal?
If she said she'd give us 2%, it would be mandatory, and we would have that water flow into Lake Powell and then into Lake Mead. We would have a deal for some period of time. So then we would need to adjust if that's not enough.
So, and that would be 2% of whatever water is available on a given year, or what?
At 500,000 acre feet or 5 million acre feet, that's what, 100,000 acre feet?
Okay, and that gets you a deal?
That would get us a deal for some short period of time.
So I'm actually kind of stunned that it's that small a number.
So were we.
Okay. So maybe we need to solve this today, huh?
Maybe.
Shannon Mullane with the Colorado Sun has been watching questions from readers. Go ahead, Shannon.
We've got a question from a reader in Jefferson County. It's about water rights, and so we'll do our best here. But this reader is interested in explaining who, like the senior and junior water rights, talking about, for instance, Arizona, I suspect, has the more junior water right, but probably has the most need. How does that play out in litigation?
So what was the last part of the question?
How does it play out in litigation?
So first of all, something needs to be corrected. Arizona does not have the junior priority in the basin. We have a junior priority for the Central Arizona project vis-a-vis California and then within our own state.
Right.
In a way, the obligations of the compact make the upper basin junior to the lower basin because they need to provide 82.5 million acre feet over a 10-year rolling average.
So they are junior because they have this, in your view, delivery obligation.
So to further answer this question, right, when that junior priority was imposed in the 1968 Act in Congress, there was an expectation that we were going to get the 82.5 million acre feet over a 10-year rolling average. So you could say that we relied on that. That might be one path you go down if we end up in front of 9 men and women in black robes.
And that's not a place you want to be, I imagine.
We do not want to be there. But as we've said many times, we will protect our legal rights if we have to, if we can't get to a collaborative 7-state deal in which everyone participates.
So the thinking, though, from this, when you talk to farmers up here, they see the growth of Phoenix and Tucson and say, wait a minute, why should I have to cut back to subsidize this rapid growth of desert cities with rights that are beneath ours? And you would suggest, first of all, that the rights aren't. Is that right?
That is correct.
So you trump them in this situation. But so is that all you say in response? Or, I mean, in the real world, though, these are people who are relying on this water and seeing tremendous growth that may not be sustainable in the Southwest.
So with the cuts that Arizona's had to take under the current operating guidelines, I have dried up the farmers in one particular county south of metropolitan Phoenix by 50%. 50%, it's not coming back. It's not a cut that's variable with Mother Nature. They're cut. They're not coming back. We have taken a lot of pain. The lower basin has 165 feet of water in Lake Mead with the help of Mexico since about 2014. Without it, Lake Mead would already be pushing the Deadpool horrible outcome. Half of that water came from the state of Arizona. Half of that water came from one Indian tribe in the state of Arizona, the Gila River Indian Community. We have given our fair share, and now we need everyone else to give their fair share.
All right. John from Nevada has a question for us. He says, are there any Plan B type ideas in the works? A major Plan B would be to explore seawater desalination plants. It's extremely costly, but something to look into. Is that, I mean, I know that idea comes up here and there, but it's generally speaking been viewed as impractical or too costly. Is that changing?
So the cost is continuing to go down, but it is going to be costly regardless. Whether or not agriculture could afford to use that water is a big question. It's many times more than what they normally can afford. We have a deal with Mexico. We have been looking at desalination in Mexico and moving the water into the United States. There's a United States-Mexico work group. I'm actually the co-chair of that work group for the United States. So we are very interested in that as an opportunity.
So the current environmental impact statement, which came out from the Bureau of Reclamation, which I guess signals where this is headed if the states can't come to an agreement. I guess that's accurate to say. It's not the official rules, but it's certainly a signal. Are they unacceptable to Arizona?
In its current form, and we haven't seen the final form, and
Right.
we've been trying to work with
that caveat, yeah.
Yes. So they would cut the lower basin by 3 million acre feet in priority. One view of that priority means CAP would go dry. My cities in northwestern Arizona would go dry. My farmers in Yuma that provide 80 to 90% of the green vegetables in the wintertime would lose somewhere around half their water. Those are draconian cuts. The other things that would be impacted are national defense, right?
Right.
A lot of the national defense products come from Arizona. Those farm products from Yuma, that's a national security issue. So there are draconian impacts on the national level that would occur if that outcome is what shows up in the record of decision and if it is implemented.
So I know Arizona has other sources of water, including groundwater. Obviously, that's not forever water. That is not a fully sustainable solution, but there's a lot of it. To what extent do you factor that into the discussions?
So that groundwater is not part of the Colorado River. I'll say that unequivocally.
Right.
In 1980, we passed a landmark piece of legislation that essentially, at the higher level, said, let's save that groundwater for a dry future day. So we will be accessing some of that groundwater to deal with some of the reductions. We've also put unused Colorado River water under the ground to supplement what Mother Nature over the millennia have put under the ground in various parts of Arizona, and we are going to use some of that resource. Neither of those two resources are infinite.
So I want to be clear on this because I don't want to alarm people unnecessarily, but what you're saying is that the cuts which seem to be coming down the pike, and this could change from the Bureau of Reclamation, would cut off the CAP, essentially, that water from the Colorado River through that canal. That has a huge impact, I believe, on Tucson. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I mean, does that affect people's ability to take a shower in Tucson?
So again, there are other resources that Tucson has available to it. The cuts that Arizona would take under the 1.5 million acre feet of cuts per year in 2027 and 2028, they will have some pain attached to them, but not at that level. If the CAP canal goes dry, then maybe there's a different outcome. But again, we would do everything we could to access our other water resources. We have cities right now putting together a cooperative plan among the cities to utilize their start sharing infrastructure, maybe start sharing water supplies, and to avoid that outcome. This water we stored under the ground since 1996. We will deploy some of that. So we'll cobble together enough resources so that people won't be prohibited from taking showers.
All right, well, clearly that's not a long-term solution. All right, stay put because we're going to bring back the other commissioners here and we'll have a conversation, hopefully a productive one, driving toward solutions maybe. Tom Bochatska, thank you. While the states argue over how to divide the river, the amount of water available continues to decline. Catherine Sorensen is a former director of Phoenix Water Services. She's now at the Kyle Center for Water Policy at Arizona State University. She's also one of 5 water experts who recently issued a stark warning about the Colorado River, and that it is headed for quoting her now, a system crash. I asked Sorensen to just how close the Colorado River is to that particular tipping point. Catherine, thank you very much for being with us. You talk about system crash, and is that the blue screen of death for the Colorado River? What do you mean by system crash?
What we're talking about is a condition where we might run through the realistically accessible storage in both Lake Powell and Lake Mead. And what that would mean is that we would only be able to release from those reservoirs the same amount of water that comes in upstream in real time. So it basically would be a condition where you've lost the benefit of the storage in those reservoirs and you're just fully dependent on Mother Nature, and whatever the river provides is what you get. And that's not a good place to be. It doesn't mean zero water. But of course, reservoirs store water for dry times when we need it. And so once you've lost that storage, you're just at the mercy of Mother Nature.
That's a dramatic statement.
It's a really dramatic statement. And, for all that the Colorado River is in a very uncertain place right now, it would only increase that uncertainty. So increasing the uncertainty on the Colorado River presents real water management challenges.
But realistically, though, we're talking about something more than a drought here. We're talking about something that's more than 2 decades, unprecedented for, 1,000 years or so. If that really is happening, it is wishful thinking to think that all of this is going to turn around.
Absolutely, that's the case, and it's a problem because what we really need to address is the over-allocation of the river, no matter how much water is coming down the river. But that becomes, of course, more complicated when there's just less water, right? And I really think that one of the reasons why we have been unable to reach a compromise between the 7 states is that there just is so little storage in the system, there is so little water left over, that these fights literally become existential for different communities. So yeah, it's very uncertain and difficult times.
All right, now that we've alarmed 40 million people who rely on the Colorado River to take a shower or just get a drink of water, let's be clear about this. Whatever we're talking about here to follow is probably not going to change municipal water supplies all throughout the basin, correct?
Probably not. That's correct. People should not expect municipal tap water shortages. And that's because cities actually plan very proactively. They build up diverse water supplies made up of many different sources. And they're very careful in their infrastructure planning to make sure that they can deliver those supplies when they need to. So as examples, here in central Arizona, in the Phoenix area, we have a lot of groundwater that we can fall back on during times of Colorado River shortage. We've been careful to steward that groundwater sustainably so that it would be available during dry times. And we also have the flows of the Salt and Verde River system. So we can absolutely continue to make sure tap water deliveries are safe and reliable, but it's probably going to cost more. Right? Developing that infrastructure, developing those alternative water supplies is no easy task. So while people shouldn't expect a tap water shortage, they should expect their tap water bill to rise.
The cities in the West have done a pretty darn good job, haven't they? Rapidly growing, and yet in many cases, the amount of water they're using has either plateaued or shrunk, which is hard to imagine. That's defying the laws of gravity, isn't it?
Yeah, it's perplexing, isn't it? But it's true. Across the West, cities, for the most part, have been able to grow without increasing their draw from the Colorado River. And there's a couple of reasons for that. A lot of it, of course, has to do with the fact that all the appliances that we use indoors have become much more efficient, particularly toilets. That's really important. But probably more than that, the way that we grow and develop subdivisions has changed over time. Parcels are smaller as land has become more expensive, and that means less outdoor landscape that needs irrigation. And people have really embraced, Western desert adapted lifestyles, and their yards reflect that. It's very rare to see a lawn in Phoenix now. We have some really interesting statistics where in the 1970s, about 80% of single-family homes in the Phoenix area had grass. That was very common when I was growing up. Today, in the city of Phoenix, that number is less than 10%. So you're just seeing kind of this wholesale change in how cities use water.
The vast majority of the consumptive use, as they call it, the human use of the river, is ag. On the order of 75%. Is that about right?
Yeah. Of human uses, yeah.
Okay. So, the Willie Sutton approach, he robbed banks because that's where the money is. This is where the water is. So if you really want to make a dent to change anything on this river, ag is crucial. And as you said, it becomes very quickly difficult, political, cultural, all kinds of issues.
Well, having the conversation about significantly impacting agriculture or even voluntarily fallowing or buying out agriculture is politically toxic to elected officials, right? Like it's just a conversation that's very, very difficult to have. But for perspective, it is exactly what we did during the Dust Bowl. There is precedence for this. There are still conservation programs that tend to be, more soil conservation programs, but there are still agricultural programs where essentially we pay farmers not to farm, to preserve various resources. So it's something we're capable of doing. It's just that the politics of it are extraordinarily difficult.
So the political stumbling block here at the moment seems to be the stance of the upper basin states, that they are dealing with cuts which Mother Nature offers because they rely on snowpack. And as a result, they don't want to buy into any mandatory cuts because they would tell you, well, we're being cut already. What will it take to get past that impasse? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Boy, that's tough because that impasse is the core of the issue. You know, and if Arizona accepts what the upper basin states are telling it, that, they, do not have an obligation to cut their water use, what that really means is that Arizona is the junior user, not just in the lower basin, but across the entire basin. And Arizona is not, ready to accept that position. We're probably going to have a fight here in the West, in the Colorado River Basin, about who gets water and who doesn't. And that's unfortunate. Collaborative solutions are a little easier to come by when you have a little more water to work with. And that's just not where we are right now. I remain hopeful. I think that, there are many who believe that collaboration is better than fighting it out at the Supreme Court. But, given where we are right now, I'm having a hard time being optimistic about that.
Catherine Sorensen, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Throughout this program, we've heard from four of the people at the center of the negotiations over the future of the Colorado River. Becky Mitchell of Colorado, J.B. Hamby of California, Tanya Trujillo of New Mexico, and Tom Bushatska of Arizona. Now, normally their negotiations take place behind closed doors, with the states staking out very different positions over who should conserve, how much, and when. But we brought all four negotiators together for a rare public conversation, so why not? Let's do it. The stakes could hardly be higher. That river out there, I think it's been shrinking during this 2-hour live stream. The reservoirs that have provided a buffer against drought are being depleted. And after years of negotiations, the 7 states remain deeply divided over how to share a river that can no longer reliably provide all the water promised. So, common ground, that's what we're after here. We're going to call this the Camp Eddy Accords if we make any progress here. But here's what strikes me the most from the conversation so far. 2%, Tom, 2% is all the lower basin wants from the upper basin. Is that right? Confirm that for me. JB, are you on board with a 2% mandatory cut based on hydrology?
For the near term, we could live with a number in the 100 to 200,000 acre foot range if it's mandatory, verifiable, and it shows up in Lake Powell and moves to Lake Mead.
All right, when you say near term, what do you mean?
I don't know. We have a 2-year potential plan on the table. The feds have a 10-year plan. None of us know if even the 2-year plan is going to solve the problem.
Okay. All right, so you're talking about just 2 years, 2%. Is that right, JB? Would you go along with that?
I think there's a lot of ways to handle the problem. It could be 0, it could be a lot more. There's a lot of tools that are available, either between storage, developing conservation programs, curtailments. I think the main idea or focus from our perspective in California is what is the water supply that we can rely on or plan on. Obviously, moving forward, that's going to be variable. So from our perspective, I think the approach that we all need to be moving towards in the future is a supply-driven approach. But that's going to also mean that when the supply is down, the demands across the basin, both basins, both countries need to be reducing demands in line with supply as well.
Did I hear you say it could be 0?
Could be. Some years, if it's real wet, we don't necessarily need to see big cuts in the upper basin. But certainly when the river is in trouble, we need everybody to be putting on the table all they can to bring demand in line with supply.
All right, hand the mic over to the upper basin there. Becky, help us understand. 2% seems like a manageable number. It is a time of scarcity, though, and I recognize that, and I have talked to these farmers. Is that politically not viable here in Colorado to bring that to water users and say, can we guarantee a 2% cut to feed the Lake Powell and Lake Mead?
I think it's important to it's important to kind of understand what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. But what it says to me is we need to get back to the table, because I do think there is areas of alignment. And when you heard JB talk about flexibility of the timing and when that comes, when in the negotiations, we've spoken a lot about a voluntary contribution program that would look at things like conservation and optimizing storage reservoirs within the upper basin and really looking at operations that could potentially benefit the system. And so I would like to get back to the table and have the discussions with the sovereigns.
Tanya, 2%. How does New Mexico feel about that?
Well, I think I agree with all of the other members here. And I think what we're also working on is trying to get some federal support and federal responsibility for the management issues that we're working on as well. So it's going to take all of us working together to build this puzzle that we're working on right now.
So, Becky, if there was a federal pot of money to facilitate a 2% commitment, would that help?
I think one of the things that we've looked at with the contribution program is that of federal support. I think that is critical, and I think that's critical for all the basin states, is to find ways to push the envelope when Mother Nature is calling us to push the envelope, and it is helpful to have financial incentive to do that. We have to look at actually solving the problem for the long run at the same time. We know, all of us have said, the pie is smaller, that we're going to have to live with, I think most of us have said it needs to be a supply-driven system. And so I think you can look at federal funds at times when we really need to push the envelope, and it would obviously be helpful.
So it's maybe more of a Dust Bowl style approach, something bigger, more comprehensive. JB, you're a student of history. When the Dust Bowl happened, the federal government intervened in a big way.
Sure, and there's a long history of the federal government being involved in this space. We've seen a lot of success, enormous quantities of water that the lower basin states, in partnership as well with Mexico. When we made this moonshot goal back in 2023 of 3 million acre feet, that was an unprecedented amount of commitment to put back into Lake Mead in the system. By the end of this year, we're going to exceed that by 700,000 acre feet. And then there's an additional volume on top in Mexico. That, in large part, was with the support and partnership of the federal government, both the prior and the current administration. And the Law of the River is peppered with references, the U.S. having certain responsibilities. Like in the 1968 Act, the U.S. took on the responsibility, the obligation for dealing with the Mexican Treaty, 1.5 million acre feet. And over years' time, historical reference, nothing has really materialized from it, but I think it's a conversation that is worth having.
So let's talk about taking it aside from the federal government, because we all know how efficient that can be, getting that kind of money. But when you look at California, there's some novel ways historically where municipalities have essentially paid farmers not to plant as much, or encourage conservation. The QSA is what I'm talking about. Becky, that hasn't happened so much in the upper basin. Why is that? Why aren't there more deals where Denver is buying out farmers to get water to Denver?
There actually are deals like that on the ground, and this year is how we survived, was deals like that. So we have seniors working with juniors and making things work. There's many circumstances where they have contracts in place for years, just like this, that are only acted on when absolutely necessary. And so we have examples of that across the state.
Okay.
But we handle it within our state.
Do you want to say something, Tom? Go ahead.
I just wanted to go back to the discussion with the federal government so that everyone knows we do sometimes agree. The 7 states recently sent a letter to the Secretary of the Interior with a list of $50 billion worth of various projects. That was done collectively with all 7 of us. And I think it's uncertain where any of that's going to lead. But there are things that we have agreed to in the past and can agree again to in the future.
Well, that's an important point here. This river, it's not just about 7 states. That's enough, but it is about the country at large. It's about me having a Caesar salad in February in Boston. That sounds like a quip, but that's true. Winter vegetables. There's a source of food security that comes out of this river, which is, I don't know that any other river basin quite matches it, frankly. So I'm curious, with that in mind, I feel like it is not enough of a priority in Washington overnight. Tanya, you spent some time there and have sat in those desks inside the bowels of the Department of Interior. Is it just viewed, let's let the state sort this out, don't want to be bothered with it? Is that how it goes?
Well, it's a complicated relationship, and it's an example where the federal government has very different roles in each of the basins. But I think in general, they need to be part of our group. They need to be part of the discussions and be partners with us in managing this massive system. The federal government owns and operates the reservoirs in the lower basin, again, has Supreme Court responsibilities about management. We need to have them with us, and they have technical experts who can help us as we move forward.
It's worth a couple of words, Tanya. I know you wanted to talk about the differences between the two basins. In a way, it's two distinct rivers in some ways, right?
Well, there are very different systems of accounting, for one thing, and that goes to history again. You know, 100 years ago, there was a federal statute that allocated water to the lower basin states. There was a Supreme Court decree that told them how to interpret that statute. And then they've had accounting agreements and accounting measures that have been in place for the last 60 years. That system is very different than the upper basin system, where we have a completely different system of agreements and accounting. And we have to figure out how to work together to mesh those two systems, or to allocate the supply in accommodation of those two systems, really.
Okay, let's. I want to go through a couple of things just to see where there is agreement. Should the lower basin permanently absorb the so-called structural deficit? Does everybody agree to that?
I think we've worked out an effective deal within the lower basin. We've put it forward in the next number of years here. We think it's important to have sustainability in the long term.
So permanent reduction. Would you agree with that, Tom?
So that deal that the lower basin worked out amongst itself, those reductions only stabilize Lake Mead if we get 8 million acre feet coming out of Lake Powell. So that's not quite what we believe is compact compliance. So absent something else, Lake Mead's going down. And I need to add about the discussion on the federal government.
Yeah.
One thing I left out,
yeah,
what goes on in Arizona is the most advanced microchip manufacturing in the Western Hemisphere. That is another national security issue going on with what's going on with China and Taiwan. So I will say the federal government has worked really hard to try to bring us together. It hasn't completely worked. I think there were some other things they might have done that could have helped that, but we are where we are.
Tanya, you've had that experience of being on that side of the table, the federal government that is. I'd put the mic up close to you too, if you wouldn't mind. But why is Interior, it seems from the outside, maybe sometimes reluctant to really get in and be strong in an intervention way on dictating terms here? Of course, we're at that point now.
Well, I'm committed to having the states be the primary voice in how we look at the future of the river. And we do have a track record of success. We're a little off track now, but we can get back together on that track. And I think the reality is all of our states have national security economies and industries that feed the nation, as you said. So we need to be working together. The federal government needs to be our partner because of their ownership and operation of the facilities. And this is a national issue. We need the congressional folks to be paying attention and helping us get through the situation that we're in right now.
All right, should reductions increase automatically as Powell and Mead decline? Would everybody agree to that? No? JB, go.
I think the main objective here is we need to take a total system contents approach. There's a lot more reservoirs in the Colorado River system than just Lake Mead and Lake Powell. But Lake Mead and Lake Powell and their contents are a good indication of the health of the system. And so if demand maintains and supply is not there and we're pulling water out of storage, there is a problem that needs to be reckoned with. So storage is valuable. We want to have it on hand for back-to-back, dry years. But certainly I think a total system contents approach is a good thermometer for how the basin is doing.
Should every basin state contribute something under truly catastrophic hydrology?
Yes.
Tanya?
Yes.
Tom?
I would say yes, but not just in catastrophic hydrology.
All right,
because you need to restore some of the lost storage in both Lake Powell and Lake Mead.
Becky?
I think yes, and we have examples that we do, and I would ask, is it just the states or is it every basin state contractor? And I think we talked a little bit about how we work differently in the upper basin than the lower basin, and so I would ask the same question of, as individual contractors, is it important that every contractor in the
you mean people who are using water?
Contractors like from Mead. So we talked about how it's hundreds of thousands of diversions and water rights up here. And,
right.
But from Mead, there's primarily about 10 major ones that are kind of a big deal. Do we see that everyone needs to put water on the table in that level also?
Should conservation be measurable and independently verified, Becky?
Absolutely.
Okay. Everybody else agree to that?
That's good. There's different ways of looking at what individual state or basin's actions are. One way is trying to have apples to apples accounting of what is conservation throughout the basin. Another approach is just looking at how much water gets released from the upper basin to the lower basin, and if we have an agreed upon amount or percentage or whatever, from my vantage point, that would be sufficient. I don't need to get into the sausage making.
All right. No, yeah, we don't need that. Tanya, what do you think?
I agree with both of them, yes.
Okay. Tom?
I agree as well, and certainly in the lower basin, the Bureau of Reclamation does that accounting. I know in the upper basin it's done by the states. It would be helpful, and honestly, the upper basin in our discussions has agreed to have more of a role from the federal government. I hope that's correct in that regard. So again, we rely on reclamation to be that person, that entity. We rely on reclamation's technical modeling that they use to help manage the system. And I think we all agree that they're the right ones to do that. None of us always agree with exactly how they do it, but I think we've relied on them in the past, and it's worked out pretty well for all 7 states, in my opinion.
Should farmers and communities that give up water be compensated? Tom?
So it's a difficult question. I think certainly my senior priority users want compensation. Some want to rely just on the priority system and be left untouched, and it depends on who that is in my state. I think that's one method, but as a long-term proposition to expect to be compensated when we have a river that's shrinking, and those reductions are probably going to occur almost on an annual basis, and where do you keep getting that money out of that?
It would have to be
pot?
Something long-term, wouldn't it? Tanya, what do you think of that idea? Should there be an ongoing compensation fund for people who lose this water?
Well, I think we definitely need a durable funding mechanism to help with the mechanics of operating the Colorado River system. So conservation programs are going to vary state to state, district to district, and there are a lot of different ways to deal with it. But the key is incentivizing that and rewarding good behavior. So we can work on that and figure something out.
JB.
Having money available is an important tool, whether it's used in these sort of voluntary transactions or it's used for infrastructure improvements that can do things like in California, the Metropolitan Water District, in partnership with folks in Arizona and Nevada, to develop 150,000 acre-feet of new supply from taking wastewater that would otherwise go to the ocean and having that as a new supply in the basin. So there's a lot of tools available, and having dollars and resources to be able to apply to this problem is essential.
All right, Becky, what do you think?
I think that's a complicated question, but I pretty much agree with most that has been said up here. I would just say I would urge us to not create, through this process, expanded uses. And what I'm hoping is that we don't conserve and replace that with other water and not know how to cut back. So a little bit of a complicated answer. Sorry about that.
All right. Are there simple answers on this river? I don't think so.
No.
All right. Let's. Everybody I've spoken to dreads the idea of this going to court. In this case, it would be the Supreme Court, where I'm not sure if there's a water expert sitting on the court right now, but I imagine that could be a big challenge to get all the key points across and all the complexities. And who knows how that's going to turn out. Tom, is this headed? I know that Arizona is laying the groundwork for litigation. Is it inevitable, in your view, that it's going to court at this juncture?
So I don't think that it's inevitable. If we can get together and avoid that outcome through a 7-state collaborative process, we can still avoid that outcome. But perhaps Arizona's been the most transparent about its efforts. But I think every state and many water users in each state are seeking and have already gotten money to protect their rights and their positions in any potential lawsuit. So it's not just us.
Tanya, litigation.
We should avoid that. I think we're dealing with questions that haven't been tested and haven't even been investigated, and there's huge risk to all of our states and our water users in each of our states. And we should try to work together as opposed to fight about these questions, because it's only going to destabilize things further if we're in court and giving up our rights to somebody else. That's the worst thing we should do.
JB?
Ditto.
All right. Becky, litigation.
Litigation doesn't create any more water.
So I think we've found some points of agreement here. We still have a few minutes left. Can we come together on 2%, let's say?
You're cute, Miles.
Thank you all for enduring my efforts here. We spent a lot of time talking about how 7 states will divide a shrinking Colorado River, but they're not the only sovereign governments that are in the mix on all of this. There are 30 tribal nations that depend on the Colorado River Basin. Many of them have some of the most senior water rights, and yet for many tribes, they don't have any access to the infrastructure to get water to them. One of the exceptions to all this is the Gila River Indian community in Arizona. Much credit for all this belongs to a legendary attorney and a member of the community, Rodney Lewis. Lewis brought a case to the Supreme Court and ended with a 2004 settlement that gave the Gila River community some water, which had replaced the Gila River itself, which had been diverted upstream of them. PBS News correspondent Stephanie Sy picks up the story from there.
Rodney Lewis, the tribal attorney who fought for the water rights settlement, is the late father of the tribe's current governor, Stephen Rowe Lewis.
You know, the senior water rights versus the junior.
Building on his father's legacy means conserving the water, so he takes particular pride in this water recharge station. It allows the tribe to bank water they don't use. It's the only place where you can still see a slice of the Gila River on the reservation.
We've returned part of the flow of the Gila River through this area, and it's become a riparian wetlands area that we're just so proud of. We have over 100 species of birds. When we brought the water back, it was almost like the land healed itself.
With the Gila River no longer the reservation's main water source, the settlement granted the tribe a big chunk of Arizona's Colorado River allocation. In fact, the tribe of 21,000 members is the largest single entitlement holder on the Colorado River in the state. It's a reversal of fortune that few other Native American tribes have achieved. The much larger Navajo Nation is far from settling its water claims. Never mind farming, many of the more than 170,000 tribe members who live on the reservation still have to haul water to their homes. Governor Lewis is aware of the special position he's in. The tribe's large allotment gives him outsized power in a time of scarcity, and he says responsibility.
How big of a challenge now is climate change for your whole vision?
Everything we're doing is critical. at a time where we have to continue to model this good behavior. When tribes are at the table and making decisions, when we're able to have the resources, we're able to bring very innovative solutions.
Stephanie's story is an important reminder that this river isn't simply divided among 7 states. Tribal nations are sovereigns too, and they have some of the most senior rights to its water. Our next guest brings both a personal and professional perspective to that issue. Jason Howder is a member of the Gila River Indian community and an attorney who represents the community on Colorado River issues. He's been directly involved in basin negotiations since 2016 and is representing the community in current negotiations over the river's future. Jason, we're glad you could make the trip to be here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's good to get out of Washington in the summer, though, right? So you just heard that discussion. What's missing from that discussion?
Well, I think what you heard in that discussion is how difficult this issue is. The river is in you use the word crisis. I think that's an apt term. And these are problems that are going to take some time to figure out long term. And I do think one area from this, I'm involved in negotiations, and one from a tribal perspective, I've heard a lot of tribes talk about, is maybe what's missing is federal leadership. And I'm not just meaning this administration, I'm meaning past administration. There's been a deferral to, or kind of a deference to states figuring it out. But these are serious problems, and they're very difficult at times for the states to address on their own. And kind of strategic prodding by the federal government and the incentives that you're going to need, both in the short term and the long term, I think are needed here. And I think that's one thing that's missing.
I think this is a recurring theme here.
Yeah.
Almost everybody has said this, that the federal government has to step up, be more engaged, put some money on the table to facilitate some of this transition. It's way too important. I mean, with all due respect to the states, it's beyond their capacity to come up with a decision, I think. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that the problem is so big, it's very difficult just to rely on the states. And to be fair to the United States, they're very engaged, but I do think the resource side of things are not as large as they really should be to really solve this long term.
Yeah, and it means so much to this country. Shannon Mullane with the Colorado Sun has been harvesting all kinds of viewer input, and she's got some very smart readers. Shannon, go ahead.
Thanks. So we have a question from Alan in Colorado, and it's more of a general question for tribes, so maybe you can speak to it for the Gila River Indian community. But here's the question. So how can tribal entities that are entitled to water from the Colorado River ensure that they get their fair share, including creation or enforcement of conservation and environmental uses of water? What sort of leverage can they deploy to avoid being mistreated in this process as they have in the past?
Could you hear that okay?
Yeah,
great question.
I think it's a great question, and it's a complex question, like all questions that touch on this river. I think it's important for people to understand that tribes are in different spots or circumstances within the river, and some have unresolved claims, some have court decrees that give them senior water rights, but not federal funding to help do the things they need to do to fully implement their water rights and put that to use. And some tribes, like the Gila River Indian community, went through a very, very long fight to get its water rights back, to settle its claims, and get congressional approval. And it's those tribes, I think, that are in a better position, that seek settlement and have the tools in that settlement to have the flexibility to really benefit from those water rights and become a success story. But despite that, we're still faced with serious challenges. And the Gila River is within Arizona. It's the largest entitlement holder of Central Arizona Project water and the most at risk of severe cuts of any single water user in Arizona.
Well, that's talk about frying pan in the fire.
Yeah.
Rodney Lewis, has this epic court case, wins. You get not Gila River water, but Colorado River water through the CAP, and you think you're good, and now you're in a situation where you're very vulnerable. So what is the lesson there for the tribes? I mean, first of all, you would, in the context of Arizona, have senior rights, correct?
Correct. I think it's important to understand with Gila River's settlement is that it was a very large claim, in excess of 2 million acre-feet per year, because of its history of agricultural use of water in the central Arizona area. And to resolve that claim, it couldn't all be satisfied through politically by Arizona through basically stopping the descendants of people who stole that water from the tribe initially. And so CAP water is really in lieu supply to partially satisfy those claims. And in addition, money to help create the infrastructure to use that water for agriculture. What the community's done since then is really use that funding to smart water planning, and then use some of the federal programs that are part of Colorado drought funding to really invest that into long-term conservation projects on reservation so it has a very efficient irrigation system within the reservation. So I will say, and it dovetails with Tom Bushosky said earlier, when Rod Lewis agreed and the council at the time agreed to take CAP water, it was relying on the 1968 Act and 8.23 million acre feet coming down from the upper basin and the lower basin. So its reliance on that, it wasn't an expectation that would be disrupted. So that's a challenge it's facing, and it's trying to work through how to do that and how to transition to a new normal as everyone is in this basin.
Well, new normal it is indeed. Now you, the community fought long and hard for its rights. Mm-hmm. It's quite a story. It really is. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you all take great pride in what the Gila community has accomplished in all of this. And took water that it earned and put it in Lake Mead to store it and help the problem in exchange for some compensation. To me, that's a perfect model of how the tribes could really help move the needle on this problem right now. There are other Gilas out there that can do similar things, like exercise, water rights which may not be utilized, for example, and agreeing to cut water rights as opposed to water itself. Does that help the problem in any way?
Yeah, I think tribes can put a lot on the table, and more on the table. There's the Colorado River Indian tribes that recently had legislation that allows them to market water, but also do long-term conservation and leave water up in Lake Mead. And they did, under the drought contingency plan, they did contribute, I think a total was I could be wrong here, 150,000 acre feet of paid system conservation under the DCP. Gila River's put in a little over 1 million by the end of this year. Some of that's compensated, some of that's intentionally created surplus, really stored water, and some of that is agreeing to take cuts, uncompensated cuts and unmitigated cuts, some of those. And so, for instance, this year the community is taking a cut of over 80,000 acre feet of its water, unmitigated, uncompensated. And it agreed to do that. It could have made the choice to fight that, but it agreed to do that. And this year that's the cut it's facing. And it's likely going to face similar cuts in the new guidelines on the next 2 years.
If there was more sentiment like that up and down the basin, we'd have a different story, wouldn't we?
Yes, I mean, I think the lesson of the community, though, is we really need to, we have a lot at risk, and so it's in our best interest to help prop up and help conserve water in Lake Mead. I think all water users have benefit from that. Some are maybe looking down the road, not quite where the community is in terms of facing that risk. And so you have those kind of holding back and not doing more. I think at some point we're all going to have to get off the fence and do more.
Evidently. Now, you're an astute student of these negotiations, although you haven't been directly at the table because of the nature of the 7-state compact. I'm curious, having, I think what you heard today, you've heard before, nothing new here. I'm curious, when you look at it, if you see some fresh perspective or idea that's being overlooked that could get these parties together.
Well, a fresh idea. I think there's a lot of good ideas. I think one of the challenges we have is is how do we, I think we have to recognize that some of the reasons why we're not making more progress is a timing thing. What I've noticed from my involvement in this is water users often, they don't want to change behavior. And it takes time to adjust to the new normal and change behavior. And so how do we find ways to help people transition to using less water and relying less water, whether that's an ag or whether that's M&I and when future growth within this area? Because there's going to be growth. There's going to be growth in the Front Range in Colorado. There's going to be growth in central Arizona and elsewhere. But how do we do that in a way that is sustainable? And that's going to be, I think, it's not about carving up the pie in the most advantageous way. It's because the pie's not big enough. It is about creating other baked goods, if you will, to add to the water supply and augment the water supply, but those take time and they cost money, and so it will require some federal support, but also state and private funding.
That's it. We need a bake sale.
Yeah.
Perfect. That'll solve it. Now, your ancestors lost their water. It was diverted unfairly, and I suppose, and ultimately fought the good fight to get it back. But there is, I think, an overall historical lesson here for this conversation, putting it in the context of what has happened to the tribes and how their water has been lost. Are we perhaps overlooking the big picture here that we're not playing with fire, we're playing with water?
Yeah. I mean, I think our Gila River is a story of a very successful farming community within central Arizona that after the Civil War had its water taken away, not by Mother Nature like we're facing now, but by settlement in the West and all the incentives for non-Indians to settle the West, which was by and large a huge detriment to tribes at the time. Now, during that period of time, around the turn of this last century, there was famine on our reservation, and when you ask that question, I think of Governor Lewis's comments he made a number of years ago at a meeting where he said, we face this history and we don't want anyone to have to go through this. We need to find ways to avoid that. Now, the community wants to be a good partner, a responsible water user, a responsible member of society here, and is willing to do certain things. But we all need to do it, not just some of us. And I think that's really, or we're going to face those hard choices in those situations where it is severely damaging to this area of the United States.
All right, Jason Howder. Excuse me. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. Good words to end there. We've spent a lot of time talking today about the enormous human effort required to manage this river. Dams, reservoirs, canals, laws, treaties, billions of dollars, lots of concrete. But maybe we could use a little help from nature's own water engineers. Not far from here, in the headwaters of the Colorado, beavers are doing what they've done for millennia, building dams, slowing the flow, spreading water across the landscape, and creating wetlands that can hold onto it longer. In a hotter, drier West, researcher Emily Fairfax believes these industrious rodents may be an important nature-based solution. I went to Wyoming to see her handiwork.
They don't call them busy for nothing. A typical beaver family consists of a mom and dad that mate for life. They have a litter once a year, anywhere between 1 and 6 kits.
So in a given family at a given time, you could expect there to be somewhere between 6 and 10 beavers with the parents, the quote-unquote teenage beavers, and then the little kits.
The water cover they create is an effective defense against predators and a great way to encourage more growth of the tree bark, leaves, and plants they eat.
They can go all the way up and down this river corridor and stay in the water 95% of the time, access more food, access more building material, and generally have a bigger area to roam.
The streams here flow into the headwaters of the Colorado. And beavers are building infrastructure that can really help out. Because this is one of the most overutilized rivers in the world. Help us understand how that could help that overall system, that overtaxed system.
So every one of these wetlands is like a speed bump for the water, delaying that water.
As climate change brings warmer temperatures, more rain, and less snow, retaining water here becomes even more essential. These wetlands help store and release water gradually, sustaining downstream ecosystems as the climate becomes less predictable. The wetlands can also help curb both the causes and effects of wildfires.
The Mullen wildfire is growing.
It's nowhere close to being contained.
Winds have helped the fire to grow to 176,000 acres.
In 2020, a mega fire tore through this area, leaving its mark. Dead gray trees now stand in stark contrast to the lush, linear oasis. During the blaze, this wetland wasn't just a refuge for beavers, but for countless other species. And long after the embers cooled, it remains a lifeline.
After fire, what do you do in the landscape? Like, how do you repopulate when it's this bad of a burn? Well, we have mature pine trees here. We have mature willows. We have beavers. We have this sediment capture. We're 4 years out now from the fire, and these beaver wetlands are still the hotspots of biodiversity here.
So maybe one answer to the Colorado River crisis is to let nature do a little more of the work. Emily, joining us live on her birthday. Happy birthday, Emily. Thank you,
Miles.
for doing this. We do appreciate it. I know you've been in the field, slogging around in some of the places we joined you a while ago. Let's get real. I mean, when people hear about this initially, including myself, they're a little skeptical. What can a beaver really accomplish? Give us a sense of scale and perspective on what's realistic. A beaver is not going to fill up Lake Mead, right? Well, go ahead, elaborate.
Yeah, so today we have what feels like a decent number of beavers. But if you look back before the fur trade, we had 10 times as many as we have today. If I was to ask anybody here, can I get a permit to build 1 billion small dams? Everyone would say, no, that's going to be such a big deal. But that's how many beaver dams we had, and we could have a lot more going into the future. It's really our choice if we want to partner with them and let them do their thing.
All right, Shannon Mullane has been here all for the full 2-hour session. We appreciate her being persistent about it. She's with the Colorado Sun. She has a reader question. Go ahead.
But we have been getting a lot of questions about what humans can do, and I was wondering if maybe we could ask one of those. Does that sound like a good idea?
So, citizen input.
Yeah, I'll go for it.
Should people go out and get beavers? Put them in their backyard, right?
People shouldn't just go pick up beavers and put them in their backyard. This is a wild animal. You need to handle them gently and sensitively and within a lot of regulations. But what we can do is we can learn from beavers. We can mimic beavers. We can make better habitats so the beavers can move in and do what they want to do, slow that water down, keep it on the landscape, revitalize ecosystems. If you like rafting, fishing, hunting, birding, any of these things, you need a healthy river corridor. You need beavers. Do whatever you can to make it so they can come back and thrive.
All right, walk us through the initially counterintuitive notion that damming up water in the headwaters of the river and holding it back, actually from the river, it seems, helps the river. How does that work?
You know, I've been an engineer, like a human engineer, before, and a lot of our engineering is very rigid. And we think we're going to build this dam, it's going to stop the water. We will control its flow. We will decide when it goes. Beaver dams are fundamentally different. They're leaky structures. They're helping get the water into the soil where it's protected from evaporation, where it moves slowly downstream, so it's there when we need it. We're getting so much more rain instead of snow, so it's not about holding the water off the river. It's about releasing that water to the river when the river expects it and when we expect it.
So you don't want it all at once, is the idea, right? That's a flash flood, and that causes all kinds of environmental consequences, I suppose.
Absolutely. We need our water throughout the summer. If we want to grow crops, if we want to recreate, that water needs to be consistent. It needs to be arriving over June, July, August, September, and that's not going to happen unless we can slow it down a little bit. And that's all it comes down to. Beavers are slowing it down.
So let's talk about fires for a moment as well. That place we went to what was the name? It was the...
We went to the Mullen Fire and the Cameron Peak Fire.
Yeah, the Mullen Fire, which was located, it's in Wyoming. I'm trying to remember the name of the Medicine Bow. Mega fire.
Yeah.
And this really beautiful green swath, engineered by beavers. What is it, there's a lot of things that provides the ecosystem. Number one, potentially at least it's a fire break. I guess with this fire, that was not going to stop it. The fire, the firebrands would go over that. But is it possible that some of those swaths of green could actually stop fires before they spread?
It's absolutely possible, and this is something my lab's been really focused on in the last couple of years. We've been looking at fires across North America and finding when do beaver wetlands actually create fire breaks versus when are they making refugia, these safe patches that don't burn. They're there providing services, but they didn't necessarily stop the fire. And what we're finding is it happens more often than you'd think, which at first feels absolutely outside of reality, like come on. But think about when we build fire breaks. We thin the vegetation. We put down water or fire retardant. We're trying to widen an area that's difficult to burn. I've just described to you a beaver wetland. It's wide, it's got thinned vegetation, it's wet, it's hard to burn. They're doing the same things we do.
So more beavers would mean less fires in theory, although you probably haven't got the data yet. You're working on that, right?
We're modeling that right now. We're working with BLM. We're working with the Foundation for America's Public Lands. We want to answer that question. How many beavers do we need to stop the fires? How many beavers do we need to change their behavior to get them back into the natural fire regime?
So it seems to me when you think about this, and in talking to your friend Sarah Koenigsberg about this as well, when we went to see some beavers in Utah, this idea that our notion of what is natural might not be correct, because basically the visual history we have goes back, 100 years or so, 150 maybe. And beyond that, we really don't know what the terrain looked like. And once European migration occurred here, things started changing pretty rapidly. So have we created a system that is so far from what nature intended that we've created this, kind of tinderbox for fires and have exacerbated drought and made things like the Colorado River more susceptible to all these problems?
We definitely have done a lot of that. I mean, if you think about what this continent would have been like, it was braided rivers everywhere. It was huge wet valleys. It was a billion beaver dams. It was huge wood jams and log rafts and just complexity and messiness. And that's gone. I mean, the river behind me doesn't look like that, and it should. That's what it was like for thousands and thousands of years. We're living in the disturbed state. Our laws of physics to govern rivers were based on rivers that were very recently eradicated of all of their beavers, all of the wood. They were so different. That's why we can describe them with essentially pipe physics.
Shannon Mullane, Colorado Sun. Let's talk about beavers with Emily.
Of slowing water down, but I'm wondering, is there such a thing as slowing water too much? What happens to farmers if they don't get water when they expect it because of a beaver dam upstream?
And this gets into the beaver-human conflicts, which you get involved in quite a bit.
Yeah, so the good news is beavers have not yet learned how to build dams with concrete and rebar, and so they are not slowing the water down that much. They're going to slow it down a couple weeks, maybe a month. If you have tons and tons of beaver dams, maybe a few months, but it's not years. It's not the kind of water hoarding that we really worry about. What instead farmers can count on is having water during those late summer months. They may see less water during that peak flow in spring, but they don't need it as much then. That's not when the crops are thirsty. So it's a fair thing to be worried about. If I was going to go build a bunch of dams, that would be a big concern. But when beavers do it, it's a natural process.
So it's interesting. Beavers are a regionally controversial, I should say, right? If you look at this river basin, people kind of get it. If you in the Mississippi River Basin, where the problem is often too much water, you get a different response. So it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. Do you think about it as strictly improving things in the West?
You know, I don't, and you'll probably think I'm trying to sell you the silver bullet, but beavers also help with flooding. Beavers also help with pollution. Beavers help with the whole hydrologic cycle. They help with biodiversity. They help with carbon. There's a joke in my field that if you have a problem, there's a beaver for that. It's not quite that simple, but truly, this is a powerful ecosystem engineer. They're second only to us in their ability to change the earth.
But it does create situations where they run afoul of people. We've talked about this quite a bit, you and I have, so we've done stories with you. Convincing people that it's a good idea to have your back 40 or some portion of it flooded is a difficult thing, right?
It absolutely is. You know, beavers are stubborn. They're chaotic. They don't use blueprints. They don't tell us what they're doing. We want to live in the same places they do. Sometimes they chew down your favorite tree. But ultimately, what I've seen happen in the east and the west and the Midwest, everywhere, is a disaster hits, a drought, a wildfire, a flood, and then someone sees the beaver dams withstand that and the habitat be protected, and they see their neighbor's house not burn because it's surrounded by healthy river corridors. And that's an action that they can personally do. They can protect the beavers, they can restore the rivers, and they can protect themselves. You don't need to wait for a commission to make that choice. You can make it on your own.
So we're sitting beside a river. Right here it looks kind of bucolic, but it is heavily engineered. Lots of pipes, lots of pumps, dams, reservoirs. It's more of a plumbing system than a river in many respects. Is it, in a way, a little bit quaint, or is it, you know, the horse a little too, or is the beaver too far out of the barn? Is the horse too far to the barn to imagine truly natural, nature-based solutions having a real impact on this engineered plumbing system?
I don't think it is, because as engineered as this feels, you go up to the headwaters and there are so many miles of stream that just with a light touch can make a huge difference downstream. We have so much low-hanging fruit on our public lands where conflict is low, where opportunity is high, and potential for rewards is huge. We just have to lean into it. Like, this is a real nature-based solution.
It goes against our grain a little bit. Humans want to control things, don't they, in very specific ways. Talk about that a little bit.
You know, we feel very nervous when we don't know exactly what's going to happen. That's one of the reasons why the whole issue with this drought right now is very stressful. We don't know what the future looks like. We don't know what next year's water will look like. We need that control. Beavers also need that control. They are just as obsessed with controlling water as we are, which does not make it easy for beavers and people to come to the table together and decide how we're going to manage this basin.
Beavers and people at the table together. I like that image, and it's a good way to leave it. Maybe they can solve the problem. Just bring the beavers in.
I noticed they were missing from your panel.
Only 2%, they'd say. We'll take the 2. All right. Emily Fairfax, thank you. Happy birthday. Congratulations on your work.
Thank you so much, Miles.
It's really fun and interesting. It's okay to be fun and interesting and consequential.
All three.
Before we go, I want to tell you about a new project that I could not be more excited about. I'm as eager as a beaver. For the past 2 years, I've been on an extraordinary journey with my team, traveling all around the country and the world, 4 continents, meeting scientists, engineers, entrepreneurs, and some wonderfully unconventional thinkers, like Emily, who are tackling some of our biggest problems with some pretty audacious ideas. The result is a new 5-part docu-series on PBS called Resolve to Solve with Miles O'Brien. That's me. And Emily's fascinating work with beavers is in one of the stories you'll see in our very first episode, premiering tonight, 10 p.m., 9 p.m. Central, right here on PBS, right after Nova. It's been quite an odyssey putting these 5 episodes together, and I hope you'll join me for the journey and let me know what you think. And we're always looking for more solutions out there and solvers. And that does it for our journey here tonight. It's been a fascinating few hours, 2.5 hours, really. I'm not sure we solved the problem, but I think we shed some light on things. Many thanks to our gracious hosts here at Grand Junction. Camp Eddy is the place that couldn't have been nicer to us. I'm hopeful that conversations like this can lead to some new thinking about how we preserve and still make use of the remarkable river that is flowing behind me. Kind of tepid, but it's still flowing. There are no easy answers, but one thing is certain: the future of the American West depends on finding a way to share a shrinking river wisely, fairly, and sustainably. Now, I want you to stay with PBS News for coverage like this. You will not see this kind of deep dive anywhere else, I promise you. I'm Miles O'Brien. Thank you for joining us.
Funding for this program is provided by